Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the joint meeting of the Multnomah County Board of Commissioners and the Portland City Council. Audience members, I want to start by asking you to please silence your electronic devices. I would also like to remind people that in addition to the folks in this room, we also have people watching and listening online, so please consider your language and comments and testimony today. Today's meeting is a hybrid board meeting. Some presenters and guests will appear in person and some will appear virtually. For those presenting virtually, please mute your mic when not speaking. When presenting, make sure to unmute your mic and turn on your camera. For all presenters, please state your name for the record before speaking or responding to questions. Our first and only agenda item today is the joint city and county briefing on the homelessness response system, IGA, and the community shelter strategy. So for our run of show today, we're going to start off with a presentation on the Homelessness Response Action Plan and the Intergovernmental Agreement. Then we're going to move on to a very in-depth briefing on the community-wide shelter strategy. We'll take a short break, and then we will have questions, comments, and discussion time for all of us for the last hour of this. And then there will be a brief closing. So I just want to start off by thanking everyone for being here today for the joint city and county work session. Today's session follows up on the announcements made yesterday to launch our Homelessness Response Action Plan, as well as previous work sessions of this joint body to discuss our collaborative work. I want to start with a thank you to the members of this joint body who attended yesterday's press conference at Central City Concern. Mayor Wheeler, Commissioners Rubio and Gonzalez from the city, and Commissioners Stegman and Brim Edwards from the county. Your direct support for this work is valuable and appreciated. Thanks also to the leaders who stood beside us, not just yesterday, but throughout the many months of this detailed work and collaboration. Mindy Statlander, CEO of HealthShare, Dr. Bruce Goldberg, professor at OHSU PSU School of Public Health, Andy Mendenhall, CEO and President of Central City Concern, Margaret Salazar, CEO of REACH CDC, and Felisa Hagans, Executive Director of SCIU Oregon State Council. Homelessness is one of our most pressing, complex, and challenging issues facing our country, our state, and our community. It is heartbreaking, devastating, and all too common. It is a humanitarian crisis, and it's a crisis that has been decades in the making. Federal disinvestment in housing, economic instability, rising prices and inflation, persistent racial inequalities in access to care and housing, and too little mental health support, and the impacts of the pandemic have created a crisis of historic proportions. We all see and feel this every day on our streets. I've seen the same things you have, a dramatic increase in the human beings who don't have a safe and stable place to call home. It impacts thousands of people in every single neighborhood. I've seen examples in my own neighborhood of Hazelwood. There have been multiple RVs parked along my streets or pitched in the medians near my house. Some of the folks living this way provide homework help to help their kids on a makeshift RV table. They're waking up in a tent and trying to get to their doctor's appointment on time. They're trying to find recovery. They're someone's child or parent. In these moments, I know that our systems are not working properly to address the crisis that they're in. And it can't if things don't change. When I became chair, I knew we had to immediately begin developing a coordinated effort, one that would tackle this problem at its root. We needed to involve providers, people with lived experience, and the many advocates who have been working on this issue for years. I want to be clear, we are not starting this work from scratch. We are expanding on what's come before and what's worked. We are letting go of what hasn't worked, and we're moving forward. Our Homelessness Response Action Plan includes 3 things I know will help us deliver. 1, bold goals and clear outcomes for the next several years. 2, a coordinated approach that makes homelessness the priority it must be across a complex system. 3, accountability and measurement of our current efforts, key metrics to assess the work, and better data collecting and tracking. We now finally have a comprehensive count of people experiencing homelessness in our community. We know many of their names. We know that there are 11,153 people without a home in Multnomah County in January of 2024. We know about 29% were sleeping night to night on couches, in shelters, or other temporary situations. Nearly 5,400 were sleeping outside in vehicles or otherwise without shelter. This baseline gives us a starting place to measure all the work before us. It also helps us set clear goals. The first of these goals, shelter housed 2,700 more people by the end of 2025. This cuts the number of people sleeping outside last January by half. One way we'll do this is by adding 1,000 shelter beds to our resources within 2 years. This new community sheltering strategy, which we will going to be briefed on in detail today, has been developed by Portland, Gresham, Multnomah County, and a range of shelter operators. The shelter strategy also calls for hundreds of new behavioral health beds for stabilization, residential treatment, and substance use. It includes a drop-off sobering center. We'll redefine what it looks like to leave a shelter successfully by increasing the number of people who exit with a housing plan by 15%. We'll focus on the true aim of this work, keeping people in permanent housing once they get there. We'll ensure 75% of people placed in permanent supportive housing will still be there in 2 years. And yes, that will take wraparound support to address the complexity of challenges our houseless neighbors face. You'll see specific priority for some of the most vulnerable people living in our streets, especially people of color and those who identify as LGBTQIA2S+. These are people often hit hardest and longest by homelessness and are more likely to become victims of violent crime. We need to reverse these trends as quickly as possible. In order for us to do this work successfully, we must also address critical points in the system where we know people become homeless. So in our plan, you'll see a preventative focus. That means not releasing people from our systems into homelessness, stopping the inhumane practice of releasing people from hospital, treatment, or jail directly to the streets to fend for themselves without the resources they need. We'll work in partnership to increase the supply of affordable housing through regulatory changes, building conversions, and new construction funding. It is time for everyone in a leadership role to work together. It is time for us to connect everyone's individual efforts so we can move forward together. Yesterday, we released our plan. Next, we build on that collaboration that went into creating this plan by asking the community to help us pressure test and finalize it through information and feedback sessions over the next few weeks. All of it will be considered as we finalize this plan. One question everyone is asking is what's different about this plan? Why will this plan succeed? We've come a very long way in the development of our systems in recent years. We've tripled shelter capacity. We've been on a path of continuous process improvement. We've invited more people to the table than ever before. We're building up the strongest parts of our systems to meet the need and creating a level playing field for the resources every shelter provider needs to be successful. We're doing this because it's an emergency, which is why we need every single shelter bed we currently have. We need to add 1,000 more beds, and we need to fill each bed every night. Other things that make it different this time, we have more and better data. This data is collected over time through outreach and a by name list. This plan is more specific about how, when, and who will need to do this work. And this is about meeting people in their most vulnerable moments, whether it's at a point of behavioral health, crisis response, shelter, housing, or through the justice system. We are not starting from zero. We are starting in a place of strength to grow our systems to be exponentially stronger each month from here. This is an ambitious plan. It will be hard. We will make mistakes. We will learn from them. We will keep trying and working together, those of us at this table and many others throughout the system. This plan is not going to solve intractable national issues, but together we are committing to ensuring the most vulnerable people in our community will have the resources they need to be safe, sheltered, and on a path to permanent housing. I want to take a moment before I turn the mic over to Mayor Wheeler to thank the many of the people who have made this effort possible, people who've contributed to this work over several months, including and especially the staff of Multnomah County and the City of Portland. Dozens of people from city and county departments and bureaus added development of this action plan to their ongoing work, and I'm grateful to every single one of them. I want to thank the providers and advocates who contributed to and championed this efforts. Every member of the Board of County Commissioners has been instrumental in getting us to this moment. I want to thank Commissioner Stegman for leading the efforts in East County and making sure our one county approach really centers our entire county. I also appreciate your willingness to lift up the needs of our whole community through your work on the shelter strategy. I also want to thank Commissioner Brim Edwards for her deep care and concern for what homelessness looks like and is responded to in her district, formerly my district and the place I call home. She has also extended great resources and strategic vision as a part of our shelter strategy planning. Thank you to Commissioner Beeson for jumping into this work quickly after years of being the strongest community advocate possible. The work you do every day at the Northwest Health Foundation contributes to the resources our community has in immeasurable ways, and I appreciate your continued efforts to make sure the most vulnerable members of our community are given the priority they deserve. And thank you, Commissioner Myron, for continuing to underscore the need for health and behavioral health in this work, as well as the need for a coordinated system. Commissioner Myron has been calling for a more coordinated plan for a very long time, and I'm pleased that this plan gets us closer to that vision than we've ever been before. I also want to thank the Kitchen Cabinet of Advisors who walked alongside my office and the Mayor's office and the Joint Office of Homeless Services for many months to help us develop many of the considerations and recommendations that we're bringing forward today. And I want to thank the numerous county leaders and staff who contributed their best thinking and expertise to how we could accomplish a one-county approach to homelessness, what it would look like in relation to their work, what the timelines and goals and outcomes would be, and how we could accomplish what we've set out to do. Special thanks also go to the Director of our Homelessness Response System, Chris Fick, my entire staff in the Chair's office, COO Serena Cruz, and her staff, Julie Sullivan-Spaghetti, Dennis Thralt, Julia Combs, Paul Park, and Jeanette Quang-Torres for County Communications for their consistent work on our response to homelessness. And now I'm happy to turn the mic over to Mayor Wheeler to give his welcoming remarks.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair, and welcome, colleagues, both from the Portland City Council and the Multnomah County Commission. It's good to be here with all of you again. We convened today's work session knowing that the homeless crisis is the #1 issue facing Portlanders and beyond. And we have responded. I want to underscore what the chair said, that this is not the beginning point. This is a continuation of the efforts that we've already undertaken. During my time as mayor, I have watched as our city council has literally reinvented local government to address the homeless crisis. We've shifted dollars, we've created and funded new programs, we've developed new partnerships. We established the task sites, the SRV sites, associated services, created hundreds upon hundreds of new full-service shelter beds. We significantly increased the impact reduction program. We created the Portland Office of Environmental Management. We launched the Portland Street Response Program. We did the 90-day resets. We did 5 emergency declarations to move the work more expeditiously, and now we're working on Portland Solutions to move some of our programming citywide. Today's work continues that effort. So it has been comprehensive. It has been completely changing to our government, and we've been moving with urgency. Whether it's through messages from constituents, public meetings, or direct feedback from outreach staff, first responders, and public health workers that interact directly with the most vulnerable individuals on our street, we know that we have a lot of work to do, and we're coming together to fix it. Any of our homeless strategies have to be guided by data, by fact. I'm pleased that this plan does that. The Homeless Response Action Plan that we're discussing today is a commitment to fundamentally transform our approach to homelessness in the city of Portland and to do it together. In fact, as the chair mentioned, this is the first time a plan will provide a unified strategy that sets specific and achievable goals while covering critical areas previously neglected, including the important behavioral health component that the chair mentioned. I think the plan's distinctiveness lies in its clarity as well as its accountability. It sets forth explicit goals, timelines, and responsible entities, and it ensures that our efforts are concerted and that our progress is completely trackable, both by us as well as the community at large. It's more transparent, it is more data-informed. At the center of the plan is an ambitious goal. The goal is to halve unsheltered homelessness by the end of 2025. That is ambitious. It is a true call to action. And I believe that we collectively, with this plan, assuming it is implemented properly, can achieve that goal. There are so many people I'd like to extend my gratitude to. Over 24 leaders from civic, healthcare, service providers, public health, philanthropic, business, labor, community-based organizations who've all contributed hours upon hours to this effort. I want to thank my colleagues on the Portland City Council and their staffs, all of whom had a role in this process. And Chair Vega-Peterson mentioned the kitchen cabinet. And Jim Francesconi is here in the room as the representative of that kitchen cabinet. Jim, former Commissioner Francesconi, thank you for your continued service. And you're working with all of us to help bring this plan into alignment with the objective that we all share, which is to reduce unsheltered homelessness here in the city of Portland in a comprehensive way. Again, I want to thank Skylar Brocker-Knapp from my team. She's one of my senior policy directors. She spent hundreds of hours working on this issue and was certainly a key member in developing this plan. I also want to thank the rest of my leadership team for their diligence in seeing this forward. To be clear, the success of this plan will lie in its implementation. As we move forward in a more coordinated and effective response to homelessness in our community, I remain hopeful that if we can continue to work together, we will be successful. One note of caution, this is not in my talking points. The homeless struggle in our community is probably the thorniest social issue local elected officials have ever had to deal with, because it is so multifaceted. It's about poverty, it's about behavioral health, it's about addiction, it's about unemployment, it's about broader economic trends. It is about so many things. And this community, let's just be honest, 10 years ago was not set up for the kinds of issues that we are seeing on our streets. So we have had to work together to reinvent government, as I described earlier, and we will continue to have to evolve local government to address this issue. And the whole while, people will still throw the slings and arrows at us because they see the manifestations of this multifaceted crisis on their streets, and they hold us accountable for the streets. But any of us who have served any amount of time working on this issue know that there are upstream systems that have already failed that lead to these problems on our streets in the first place. So we will do our part here, and we will do it excellently, and we will push our efforts up the political food chain, if you will, so that if we do our work right here, we can start to see the changes taking place at the state level, and I believe eventually we will see Congress and presidential candidates see this as the top issue that it should be, not just here in Portland, Oregon, or Multnomah County, but nationally. So I'm really proud of the work that we're doing here, and I thank you all for working with a sense of collaboration and a sense of urgency to continue the good work that we've been doing. Thank you, Chair.
All right, we now invite Sky and Chris up. We now invite Sky and Chris up to the dais to begin the presentation. Welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. Chair Vega-Peterson, Mayor Wheeler. Chris Fick, he, him pronouns, Director of the Homelessness Response System.
And I'm Sky Brocker-Knapp, she, her pronouns. I'm a Senior Policy Advisor for Mayor Wheeler's office.
I just want to say I really appreciate the comments that were shared to kick things off. That really illustrates the collaboration and close work that our offices have engaged in, and that's helped lead us to this point. So thank you for those opening remarks. We're going to take the next 30 minutes to discuss the draft homelessness response action plan that's been shared with all of you, and that, as the chair said, was unveiled to the public yesterday. Next slide, please, Tasia. We'll start with a summation of why a comprehensive approach is so needed. Then we'll review the top-line objectives identified in conversations with you all, which include focus goals on the unsheltered population living on our streets, the racial disparities within that population, placement goals, retention goals, and prevention goals as well. We'll then walk through the 9 overarching goals within the plan itself, including a review of the proposed governance structure. The plan itself is over 40 pages long and contains about 100 action items, so we're not going to go into great depth today. But as the chair alluded to, this is a draft proposal, and we welcome the input not only of our elected officials, but of our service providers and the general public as well, which will help shape the final product. This public comment period will started yesterday and will run through the March 29th. Lastly, we'll delineate the roles and responsibilities of the homelessness response system and then talk briefly about the ongoing IGA negotiations. Next slide. But first, we want to discuss the necessity of the Homeless Response Action Plan. A number of factors, many of which were discussed earlier, led to the drafting of this proposal. First, the situation on our streets is simply unacceptable. Post-COVID, we have even more people living unsheltered, and while our community has provided our governments with funding for affordable housing and supportive housing services, the fact is we lack the full assortment of resources across the continuum that those living outside need. We lack the shelters necessary to serve everyone at once. We have a behavioral health system that is not on a scale necessary to meet the needs of those suffering from behavioral health issues. This has been the case for years in Oregon, if perhaps not even decades, and the shortage of needed treatment capacity is metastasizing our challenges. We also have harder drugs on our streets, and the lack of beds needed to provide timely access to treatment, and that's the case from sobering to detox to treatment and recovery housing. The increasing trend of polysubstance abuse only complicates treatment further. And of course, we are woefully short of the housing units our region needs, particularly for deeply affordable units. So we have issues of demand exceeding supply across the board. That means that resources are scarce and people get stuck where they are, which can mean on our streets, in our shelters, or cycling through our various systems, crisis response systems, healthcare systems, and our criminal justice systems. And people can't move them on to the care that they truly need. As a result, people languish, they get frustrated, and too often they get worse as their homelessness persists. These issues, as was mentioned before, of shelters, behavioral health, healthcare treatment, affordable housing, not to mention workforce needs, diversion away from the criminal justice system or help overcoming criminal history in their past, across government systems and lines. And while some of these systems are working together to overcome these barriers, not all of them are. And that leaves our vulnerable individuals and families, often our most vulnerable, left to navigate these complex systems themselves. So what this plan does is identify those many needs. It recognizes that we need better handoffs and coordination between services. It recognizes the need to increase the availability of services across the continuum. And in doing so, it recognizes that the responsibility to help those on our streets get into housing is far broader than the charge of the Joint Office alone. That's why this plan was crafted in the context of the expiring city-county IGA. It's an acknowledgement that across our two governments, city and county, and across the state government with our CCOs, we will collectively struggle to house a large percentage of our unsheltered homeless population if we can't get them the behavioral health and healthcare treatment they need. We won't be able to move folks out of our shelters if we don't have affordable units, and that we can't address the upstream causes of homelessness until we identify the primary causes, such as poverty, our foster care system, our carceral system. So this plan attempts to address those issues across the board. That's why it's both daunting and ambitious, and also what's needed to comprehensively tackle the issue. We're excited to have the city and county partnering in this effort and have the collaboration and support of our CCOs and Governor Kotek and her staff. Having our city and county governments, our state government, and our CCOs in closer collaboration, and ideally on the same page, is critical if we're going to make progress in these areas. This draft plan is our effort to get us all rowing in the same direction on a number of different fronts, with lead agencies identified and timelines for completion. With that, I'll hand it over.
Thanks, Chris. Next slide, please. Thank you. And you all have seen me present before. I will try to speak slowly because I tend to rush through things, so apologies. I'm just going to give you some key project examples. You've all seen the draft plan. As Chris mentioned, there are close to 100 action items, so per the 9 goals, there's about 10 items apiece. These are all individual goals and action items that will require their own work plans. So while you're going through the draft plan, or folks in the community are going through the draft plan, I just want to be crystal clear that each individual action item will require its own work plan. So we didn't want to overwhelm everyone with a very long plan, and so each individual action item will require a lot of work, frankly, in terms of the implementation process. So this is not just an end in and of itself. This is a beginning of some very hard work in the implementation process that will need to be done over the course of the next 2 years. One great example of that is that first action item that you'll see on your screen is the strategic shelter plan that you'll actually hear about next from Anna Plum and different folks that we've been working on for months. So that's a great example of the work that will need to be done, and each individual system within the homelessness response system will require its own plan as well that she'll go through. So just want to make it clear that we're going to be engaged in a lot of implementation based on those action items that are kind of the top line goals. Each action item has its own date associated with it, so that accountability mechanism that the chair and the mayor mentioned earlier is really important, as well as the responsible parties. So I think that's something that we haven't necessarily seen in the past, of which specific departments or areas within the state, county, or city government are responsible for those issues and will be held accountable by the implementation and steering and oversight committees. Next slide, please. All right, so Chris and I are going to go through some top-line objectives from this plan. Obviously, these are just a sampling, not all of the objectives and goals that are in the plan itself. But as was mentioned kind of earlier, we required a baseline number of folks who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness as they were identified in January of 2024. The chair mentioned that, the 11,000 number, the unsheltered number within that larger homelessness number within Multnomah County is 5,398. So when we had this joint city-county meeting in November, we said we will bring you an exact number once we have that in January, and we will continue to monitor that by name list. We have that foundational data now, and so that number is available to you all. 50% of that number, which is what was called for as the reduction by the end of 2025, is 2,699 people who will be placed into shelter or housing. So that shelter strategy plan that you're going to hear about will talk about how we will make that happen and the continued work that will need to be done on the implementation side for that plan. As well as, I think the chair also mentioned the 50% increase in exits from shelter to permanent housing by the end of 2025. Again, that will be outlined in this next presentation, but I'll just give you, for folks who might not understand, that 15% is an increase from folks who are currently exiting from shelter into housing. So for different shelter types that are resourced in different ways, we have a different percentage of folks on average that are exiting from that shelter into housing. So at all levels and different types of shelter, we are increasing that by 15%. So that is on top of what's currently occurring. And then the 75% of people who retain permanent supportive housing 24 months after placement is ensuring that folks who are placed into housing have the supports they need, are successful in that housing. So it costs the city, the county, the state, the nation a lot of money if folks are not successful in that housing. And it really is difficult for that person who is unable to successfully enter housing and stay there and really do whatever they need to do to be successful in that placement. We want to ensure that folks are retaining that housing once we go through the efforts of trying to stabilize folks, connect them to necessary services, and place them in that housing. So that's a top-line objective for us as well. Next slide, please.
And our other three objectives are to end discharges from our healthcare, behavioral health, and hospital systems by the end of 2025, end discharges from the carceral system to the streets by 2026, and end homelessness for youth aging out of foster care by 2027. We hope to exceed these timeframes, and the prioritizations herein are a reflection of capacity and the need to focus with certain partners and populations, but these timeframes could be modified as we look further at scoping these lines of work. Next slide, please. So now we're going to move on to the 9 goals within the plan itself, and the first one is focused on systems development. Our navigation workers, our first responders, our behavioral health providers all come into regular contact with people who are homeless. And those folks are often building important relationships with our homeless neighbors. And they need to be equipped with better tools to assist people and guide them into the services they need. That means having people assessed by coordinated access prior to being discharged from an institutional health care or carceral setting. That way we can determine those individuals' needs and make sure that person isn't released onto our streets. It means improving communication and access between our shelter system and our healthcare systems so that our healthcare partners can obtain shelter and housing for the people that they're serving, and so also that our shelter and housing providers can get their clients the healthcare treatment that they need to stay stably housed. And it means making changes to our coordinated access system. The Joint Office is already piloting changes that modify the scoring system to allow for more nuanced navigation and consideration of acuity. So this goal is focused on creating better tools to assess people's needs and then better connections to help them get that help. Next slide, please.
All right, goal 2 is the shelter expansion work that we've mentioned. So you're going to hear a lot more about that specific goal and the shelter strategy work group that was meeting and the steering committee that has been meeting for months on this work. But some of the top line deliverables are 1,000 additional short-term shelter beds that the chair mentioned by the end of 2025. That's in addition to our current supply. And then a plan for investing one-time dollars that we have right now that might help with some of the infrastructure needs around the county and the city. And then we're also working obviously with landlords to support them with different needs and also communicate regularly. So Housing Connector and different tools that are able to increase the supply of our kind of affordable housing units and units that we're able to use to place folks into housing. This is done in different ways in different jurisdictions. And one thing we've definitely learned here is that we're much more successful when we have a unit that's ready for folks to move into. And so you'll hear a lot more about that, but we have seen through different initiatives that it's even if we have the money, even if we have the services, if we don't have the unit available and ready to go, and a good relationship with that landlord that runs that unit, we won't be successful in our flow-through capacity. So again, that last bullet is incredibly important for wraparound services at all of our shelter sites. We've seen the deep need and the high acuity on the streets that we're seeing of folks who are living unsheltered right now, and the need for mental behavioral health services, physical health services. A lot of wound care is needed right now, medication, et cetera, and then the flow through capacity into housing. So like I mentioned, having that unit ready, having the services attached, having case management available, and really helping with that workforce development piece to make sure we have enough case managers to help folks succeed in that housing to retain up to that 75% plus that I mentioned earlier. You'll see a lot more information on this in the presentation that Anna Plum is going to give, and then just a reminder that all of these pieces are in draft form. So this is what we're recommending to you based on a lot of research and data gathering and discussions with experts in the field and also folks on the streets who have gone through this different process in different ways and touched these different systems. But please engage with us by, redlining this document, giving us feedback, commenting on the different pieces and what you're not seeing. One thing I'm personally excited about too about this shelter plan that you'll see is a staff-client ratio that I think will help providers, will help folks who are being served, and will really address some of those acuity needs that we're seeing. Next slide, please. Another huge piece of this plan is the behavioral health component. So Chris and I are not behavioral health experts, but we had a lot of expertise that contributed to this plan, folks who work for CCOs, hospitals, frontline workers, outreach teams, street medicine folks, so folks who really are engaged in this process every day and are telling us exactly what we need. So this plan is very specific about exactly what we need to add to that behavioral health continuum. It also is responsive to the OHA report that came out, a gaps analysis that came out recently, as well as an OHSU gap analysis from last fall. So this is all in line with what we're seeing in terms of data, needs across the state, the county, and the city, and we want to make sure that our community is building the infrastructure that we need to actually address folks' needs. We have what Chris mentioned, outreach teams. We're seeing right now with the fentanyl emergency, folks who are going out on the streets, peer navigators, really trying to connect folks to services, but it's kind of that downstream piece that's really difficult. So wanting to make sure folks have that longer term service delivery that they need, whether that's residential treatment, psychiatric care potentially. We have a deep need for both of those beds within our system, especially for dual diagnosis cases. I know you've heard this from a lot of different experts in the field. We also call for some civil commitment beds and some subacute and stabilization beds. And then as Commissioner Brim Edwards is working on the 24/7 drop-off sobering Learning Center, so we're excited about that as well. It also includes an addition of ACT teams, which we've seen are really helpful for this entire continuum response and to address the deep needs in the field.
Next slide, please. Goal 4 is focused on preventing homelessness with 3 specific populations. A 2019 study found that 32% of youth in the Oregon foster system had already experienced homelessness. 20% of foster care youth are emancipated nationally into homelessness upon their emancipation. And roughly 50% of people living on the streets have been involved with the foster care system as well. So this is a major pipeline of our homeless population, and we really owe it to them to get ahead of their emancipation and make sure that folks aren't released without the services they need to be successful. So identifying foster care that are going to age out of the system or be emancipated 6 months ahead of time and getting them the housing assistance and other wraparound supports they need to transition successfully is a huge objective. It will also help with the racial disparities we see of the homeless population as well. The same thing is true with people leaving the carceral setting who often struggle to obtain housing and employment opportunities. Having navigation assistance and other assistance identified 6 months ahead of time, particularly with navigators who have skills and background in navigating folks with a criminal record towards housing and employment opportunities, is really key to giving those folks a chance to succeed. And lastly, making sure we identify people who are being discharged from a healthcare or behavioral health centers and making sure that they don't fall into homelessness as well by assessing them for coordinated access and other needs. Next slide, please. Goal 5 is about using the right dollars and the right service and boosting our federal match. So we need to continue to explore opportunities to maximize our federal match through our current Medicaid programs for both supportive housing services and our mobile crisis response programs. Having the city and the county coordinated and united in our efforts will help our federal delegation in their efforts to give us the tools we need to expand resources and services. Finding a sustainable funding source for street response could help us both expand and enhance our current efforts. And additional housing services are a known need where federal funding could be very beneficial to our efforts. As many have said before, housing is healthcare, and the sooner we can obtain housing for folks, the better off their overall health outcomes will be. Also included in this goal is the exploration of additional focus from our workforce partners on training and job opportunities for the formerly houseless. A lot of us are familiar with these programs, and they're very successful, and expanding them further as we ramp up our programming will only help.
And I'll just also say the efficient use of funds, I think, is something that this plan really speaks to, and this goal specifically is talking about that. So really not duplicating efforts by spending local dollars where we could spend federal dollars. And I think making the most of that money. We'll work with experts to make sure that we're doing that effectively. Next slide, please. This affordable housing goal was written in large partnership with Commissioner Rubio and her staff, so really appreciate that. And it is in alignment with the city's housing production strategy. So you'll see a lot of pieces in there, some things that are already in progress and others that need to be worked on and require further work plans and implementation strategies. So for example, prioritize permitting and inspection. Obviously, the city is also working currently on consolidating city permitting to help with efficiency on that end as well. We're also looking more holistically, so not just at the government level, but also to faith-based and nonprofit organizations, different potential partnerships kind of throughout the community, trying to be creative about how we increase our affordable housing units across the city and the county. So commercial building conversion is something that's been talked about a lot. Learned which buildings kind of are ideal for that conversion and which buildings will cost more than they're kind of worth to convert. So we're really dialing in on exactly which buildings throughout town can be used for that potential conversion, and then trying to catalyze dollars to make that a reality. And obviously business spaces folks are not using as much anymore, so really trying to be efficient about not leaving buildings empty. We want to increase state remediation funds funds. I think this is a little wonky and in the weeds, but really important in terms of the time that it takes and money it takes to develop different properties. So we want to really make it as easy as possible. We don't want to create too much regulation or too much time kind of associated with a development process that people kind of give up and won't build those affordable housing units. So anything we can do to make it easier for folks to develop those affordable housing units that we so desperately need in our community. And
Can you say a couple more sentences about state remediation funds? What are they?
Yeah, so, and I will defer, sorry, to, we can have somebody from Commissioner Rubio's office talk a little bit more about it because I don't want to misspeak. Apologies, Christina, who's in the back. So, for example, right now we are, even as and I have more experience developing shelter, but we require different funds for DEQ processes or for land development or to make that like the actual site ready for construction. Yes. And there are people who know much more about that than I do. So, but yes, essentially you want to be able to construct as fast as possible. So it takes a lot of time and a lot of money, frankly, to make it shovel ready is what people like to say. Yeah. Next slide, please. Data and analytics have been talked about a lot, and I think we have incredible foundational data now. I've worked closely with the Joint Office data team, and I'm really impressed with the by name list and some of the foundational data tools that they're already starting to employ, as well as dashboards that we have across the city and the county that start to show a lot of this work that's being done and the progress. This specifically is the Safe Rest Village dashboard, so kudos to Commissioner Ryan and his team on this one. I think it's a great example of what we can show kind of about the work that's being done. So these will include different data sharing tools that track our progress. It'll also be publicly available tools. So I think we've already heard from some community members who are interested in how will we track the progress of this plan? How will we hold folks accountable? I think dashboards, from my perspective, are an easy way to do that. You make them interactive and accessible. We're learning a lot about different tools that folks like to engage with online rather than others that might be a little clunky. So different platforms for that on different housing inventories, shelter inventories, the services that are available, how we're connecting folks to different services, who we're serving, and really giving the community that overarching kind of view of what's going on, as well as the program evaluation for each of these goals and each of these action items. So we will have work plans again for each of these action items, and we need to be held accountable, and we need departments to be held accountable for those different plans, and if they're reaching those goals in the time that was allotted for those to be reached. As well as an outcomes analysis. So we've talked a lot about being iterative, learning from different actions that we're taking, different ideas that we're employing, and really being able to pivot quickly and not just stick with things that aren't working and aren't productive. So really looking at that outcome and whether we're reaching the goal that we need. I think we need to act quickly, and if we fail, we need to pivot and learn from that action. And we need to be transparent about exactly what happened and why, and then analyze that going forward. So you'll see also deeper in the plan of different meetings, and the committee structure is entirely designed for everyone to come together and analyze at a deep level what's working, what's not, what strategies need to be changed, how funding needs to be redeployed in order to reach the goals that we need to achieve. Next slide, please. The new governance structure that I mentioned aligns strategies, resources, and outcome measurements. It clarifies roles and responsibilities and includes nonprofit and private systems. So this is going to be a top governing body. The Steering and Oversight Committee is going to set those goals and strategies and align that funding that I just mentioned. So analyzing what's working, what's not, redeploying resources, changing strategies, telling departments or responsible parties, you need to change this strategy, it's not working, bring us a new work plan, stuff like that. So the voting members of this body will be the Multnomah County Chair and a Commissioner, the Portland Mayor and a Commissioner, and an East County elected official. This is obviously not set in stone, this is our draft plan, so if you have feedback on any of these members, as well as the non-voting members of this body, please let us know. So the non-voting members that we anticipate are the Metro Housing Director, a Community community-based organization or service provider, and leadership from the area's CCO's continuum care organizations. So those are folks in the healthcare community that are really connecting to Medicaid reimbursement eligible clients. So the folks that we are working with who are unsheltered and homeless largely fall into this category of being Medicaid eligible on the Oregon Health Plan, for example. So really working closely with our CCO partners. These are their clients, and so making sure that they're connected to those services, not just at for one appointment, but in a continued way. Next slide, please. Okay, this is what I personally am most excited about. So this is the implementation subcommittee, and this is for all the wonky people in the room who are excited about how all this will happen. So from the county, we will have the chief operating officer, directors of homeless services, community justice, human services, behavioral health, and the health department. We also anticipate from the city having the city administrator. This is again based on the new form of government that we'll be budgeting into starting July 1st. Of this year. So the Portland Housing Bureau Director, the Deputy City Administrator of Public Safety, and the Director of Portland Solutions. And then we have additional partners that we anticipate adding to this implementation subcommittee, including HealthShare and Trillium, which are those CCO partners that I mentioned, Home Forward, which for housing, our housing kind of strategy, affordable housing units, and then the Oregon Housing Community Services team, and then Metro Housing, so all of kind of those housing partners, and then the Oregon Health Authority as well at the state level, an East County representative, and then a school district representative. Again, these are just what we think would be the most important given all the different goals, the different work plans, and then those responsible parties that I talked about for each action item are really embedded in this implementation subcommittee. So they will be directed by the Steering and Oversight Committee to work with their teams and collaboratively to achieve those goals. And they will be held accountable for that. And that implementation subcommittee will meet to discuss those different goals, how far they're along there in the process, where they might need additional funding, where strategies are not working, where they need to pivot, all of those deep discussions about how the work is actually being accomplished. Next slide, please.
And then we have the Community Advisory Subcommittee. We've made sure that this body has at least a quarter of its members have lived experience. We also have representatives from business, labor, service providers, philanthropy, crisis response, first responders, affordable housing, developers, street outreach and navigation providers, and health and recovery organizations. The Community Advisory Subcommittee will likely act as the Joe's CBAC as well, not this year, but likely next year, to make sure that their consolidated recommendations align with the plan and are informing the full plan as well. This group also identifies emerging community needs and opportunities, provides input on strategies and tactics, and again, reviews those goals and our progress towards achieving them. Next slide, please. And our final goal is around communications. We hope to prop up a standalone website that tracks not only our numeric goals, those top-line goals that we mentioned, but also our progress towards meeting all the various policy goals and action items identified in this plan. It'll be a new home base for information, and we hope to distribute a quarterly email newsletter that updates partners and policymakers as well, and we'll do some storytelling on the website in addition. Next slide, please. So our short-term action plan, as was mentioned, we released the draft proposal yesterday. We have our briefing today, and then we have a feedback period that lasts until Friday, March 29th. Sky and I are going to do several town halls. We're doing one with providers next Monday, with the general public on the 21st. We're also going to do one for county employees as well, and I think you're thinking about doing with city employees too. And then come April, we will finalize, compile all the input we received from electeds and others, finalize the proposal, share it with you all, and then prepare for an IGA vote in April to go along with the plan. And on the IGA front, just a quick update. During the week of President's Day, the city and the county exchanged red line versions of a draft IGA plan. It includes references to this broader homelessness response system, rather than maintaining the focus only on the joint office. While we're still referring to Joe's in this update, the proposed IGA clarifies that the joint office is just one component of the broader homelessness response system. And in the 2 weeks since then, we've updated chiefs of staff on both sides of the river about the homelessness response action plan and briefed most of you about this plan as well. Last week, we had a negotiation team meeting where we discussed a small number of outstanding issues, and we'll meet again next week to incorporate the feedback and thoughts that we hear from you all today. We'll work towards finalizing that draft in April, like we said, and then we'll share it with our respected electeds in the hopes of bringing it before our both boards in April as well. Last slide, please, Tasia. And then just how the homelessness response system fits into this overall plan. The homelessness response system is my team. We're going to play a role in establishing the numeric goals and policy objectives with that steering and oversight committee, and then we're going to be responsible for tracking the progress, like we mentioned. There are points in the action plan where you have multiple jurisdictions that come together and are charged with delivering something. We're going to help coordinate that process to make sure that everyone's on the same page, not leave it to one department or one bureau to do that. We're also going to facilitate and organize the 3 committees that we just went through, the Steering and Oversight Committee, the Implementation Subcommittee, and the Community Advisory Subcommittee. Towards the start of the executive budget process, we're also going to work with the mayor and the chair to identify budgetary needs between jurisdictions that are necessary to achieve the objectives in this plan. And then lastly, like I said, goal number 9, we're going to improve transparency and accountability with that website and keep people updated on how we're doing on our numeric progress and our policy objectives. And that concludes our presentation, but we will step back and we'll be happy to answer questions during the comment period. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And so really appreciate the detailed presentation today, as well as all the time you've spent with individual commissioners and offices on this plan. We will have time for questions and comments after our break, but we are going to move right into the shelter strategy. So thank you, Chris. Thank you, Sky. Because so much of what we've talked about in these plans and these goals are really tied to this shelter strategy plan. We're going to have a presentation on that, and then we'll have time for all of us to engage in questions and discussions. So welcome, Anna and Dan. So your presentation's up. Go ahead and begin. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Dan Field, the Director of the Joint Office of Homeless Services. I use he, him pronouns. It's an honor to be here today to introduce the panel led by our amazing Deputy Director, Anna Plum, who's going to carry the bulk of the presentation this morning. But I wanted to just set a little bit of context. Next week, it will be just exactly 6 months since you all were gathered here today for the first joint city-county commission meeting. And you'll recall that we heard from James Schroeder at HMA. He was an independent consultant that we brought in to give us really a candid third-party look at our system and some of the gaps we found in that. And James interviewed 40 different stakeholders, did a best practices review, records review, joint office contracts, et cetera. And he came back to us with a series of recommendations. And I went back and looked at those and really compared them with where we are today in the presentation we are today. In his presentation, slide 7, after the introduction and overview, the first slide of substance introduced his first thematic area of concern, which was the homeless response system. And I want to read just a few lines from that slide. And as you reflect on the presentation that you just heard from Sky and Chris, and the presentation you will hear from Anna and the rest of the panel, this will set the framework from that. The concern that, the number one concern that this independent review identified was that leaders and stakeholders in Portland, Multnomah County lack a shared view of the homeless response system. Lack of alignment among elected leaders, county leaders, providers, and housing providers regarding the appropriate components of the homeless response system. Interesting that we just saw the outline of that. The concerns in particular were lack of a clear set of strategies, vision, and measurable outcomes. Philosophical differences in debate with regards to model and approach, siloed investments, which often leads to less desired outcomes. And then the final finding was that funding often drives investment versus a strategy or a plan. So very interesting as I'm just reflecting and digesting the previous presentation, how that speaks to those points. The second half of the slide identified 4 gaps. The very first gap says shelter strategy. And you'll recall that at the end of that meeting, we announced that we were going to lean in that day on a shelter strategy. And we did that for a couple of reasons. Rather than waiting the 6 months for the homeless response system to come together and come to fruition in the way that you saw this morning, we said we need to dive in right away on the number one concern, and that was a shelter strategy. And we did that, frankly, for two reasons. One, the urgency of the moment demanded it. There was no way that we were going to wait for some other plan to come together until we began the work, and so we did that. And you're here today with us to see the results of that, or the update on that. The second reason, which I think is also relevant to our work, was we wanted to dive in and begin building and strengthening the relationship between the city and the county leaders, staff, and the providers and the communities that we serve. And I think the shelter strategy will also demonstrate that we've made tremendous progress on that. And so as we look ahead to that ambitious agenda that you just saw, there's a lot on there. And it can be overwhelming, it can be concerning. Can we do all that? Can we tackle all that? We will have learnings and mistakes along the way, but I'm here to tell you that the experience, including with 4 of our elected officials who will help us present this morning, our experience gives me a lot of confidence that if we were able in a number of months to develop a shelter strategy that we're all agreeing to and all signing off on and will now begin to lean in and execute, we're already actually executing, we'll continue to lean in and execute, that fills me with a lot of confidence that the plan you saw this morning is achievable and doable. And so as we enter into implementation of the Homeless Response Action Plan, we do it with the momentum and the learnings that were provided by the shelter strategy work. So with that, let me turn it over to our amazing deputy, Anna, and let her, and we'll be bringing some panelists up here, and some of you will contribute along the way, but we'll start with Anna.
Thanks, Dan. Good morning. For the record, my name is Anna Plum, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Joint Office of Homeless Services. Thank you for having me here today to speak with you again about the community sheltering strategy. I'm very excited to share where we are with you today. Next slide, please. We have a pretty dense presentation, so I want to give you a brief roadmap because it is long and detailed. Dan gave you some context, and I'll add to that a little bit. And we'll talk about how we did the work as well, because I think that's very important. We will then focus on the recommendations that we are putting forward for the strategy, and they're in 2 major areas. First, units. What units do we want to add to our shelter system and in what configuration? And then services. What services do we also need to ensure that all of our shelter serves as an efficient pathway to housing, which is the ultimate goal for the folks in our community. We are going to hear from partners throughout this presentation. I'll talk in a little bit about the work groups that help design this strategy, but many of those folks will be speaking today as well. We have a robust list of co-presenters here that you will hear from, and I'm very thankful to all of you for your time and participation. And at the very end, we will talk about next steps, and specifically how we are planning to add aspects of this shelter strategy into the Joint Office budget for 2025. Next slide. So Dan and I kind of share a brain, so he gave you actually a lot of what I was going to say in this slide about context. But one thing I will focus on is we did hear about this, we got this recommendation in September, and then I spoke with you all in December about the beginnings of the progress on this plan. So I'm excited to be back again to speak with you about where we are and the recommendations we're putting forward. And I really do think those 2 goals are important to highlight. Number 1, what is our plan for shelter in this community, and what are our strategies to meet that plan? And then number 2, how do we practice and demonstrate the power of community partnership in meeting our goals? Next slide, please. So speaking of goals, I want to highlight how the community sheltering strategy ties in with multiple community goals. You heard earlier today about metrics and goals tied to the Homelessness Response Action Plan and the IGA that's being developed. As we were beginning our work in the work group, we knew that there were these plans in development and that some metrics were being developed to think about how we might reduce homelessness in our community. So we made sure that our work would align with those goals. And I'm briefly reviewing the goal that you heard about earlier. That major goal was to identify a by-name list of people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness as of January 2024. Once we have that number, figure out what half of that is, and then the goal is to serve, either with shelter or with housing, the number of people that's equivalent to that 50%. So we had that goal in mind as we just started developing our plans. We knew it wasn't set yet, but we thought this was a great umbrella goal for us. But at the same time, the Joint Office is also led by many other goals. We have a local implementation plan that we use for our supportive housing services measure, and all of our plans must align with those goals. And then finally, I will speak later about how one of our recommendations aligns with a policy paper that recently came out. The Joint Office actually commissioned it from the LGBTQIA 2S+ Housing Collaborative, and our plan also aligns with some of their recommendations. Next slide, please. I mentioned that our community sheltering strategy rolls up to the same goals that you heard about in the Housing Response Action Plan. We now know that about 5,400 people were experiencing unsheltered homelessness in our community in January 2024. That brings our goal for serving folks to just about 2,700 people, in addition to what we're already serving with either housing or shelter. And again, this was the umbrella goal that our strategies kept in mind as we designed strategies for each system. But I do want to be clear that sheltering has never been the only way that we will meet this goal. The community sheltering strategy is one really crucial pillar to the larger plan, and it will be a partner with all those other systems and all those other services to serve that goal. Next slide, please. So I said I wanted to talk a little bit about the how of how we did our work. And again, I think this is really important to highlight, and we're very proud of this. There were two groups that worked on this plan. The first was a work group that met every Friday from October 2023 through February 2024. This was the work group who did the work of building the plan. This work group was made up of Joint Office program and evaluation staff. By program staff, I mean those folks who have expertise in the topic that we discussed for that meeting at hand. And those folks did switch in and out depending on what we were discussing in that meeting in that day. We also had research and evaluation staff who used their data expertise, their knowledge of best practice to help influence our conversations. We also had staff from the City of Portland and the City of Gresham, and we had representation from 4 service providers: Transition Projects, All Good Northwest, Path Home, and NARA Northwest. Most of those are shelter providers. NARA Northwest is not a shelter provider, but they provide culturally specific in-reach services to our shelter system. I do want to acknowledge the work group did not include representatives from the domestic and sexual violence system or the youth system, but I met along with Joint Office staff twice with providers from the domestic and sexual violence service continuum to develop their strategy, and I worked very closely with our Joint Office contract manager for the youth system. She has worked at that system for years. She has just marvelous expertise in the needs of that system, and she also talked to her folks in the provider community. As I said, this group met weekly, and then every other week we reported our results up to a steering committee. That steering committee was made up of elected officials from the city and the county. Specifically from the city, we had Commissioners Carmen Rubio and Commissioner Dan Ryan. And from the county, we had Commissioner Lori Stegman and Commissioner Brem Edwards, and we're very thankful for their knowledge and expertise. Next slide, please. So I've said a few things about different systems, and I just want to pause for a minute because this can get a little jargony, and I want to make sure this bit is clear. Basically, when we talk about systems of care, we are talking about the different population groups experiencing homelessness in this community and how we serve them. One way we organize our services is by population systems of care. There are 4 population systems of care in our community, which you can see listed on the slide. There is the adult system that serves adults, single adults and couples. There are families with children, youth who are aged 18 to 25, and then a service group for survivors of domestic and sexual violence. I will talk about these groups throughout the presentation. I just wanted to pause to make sure that was clear. Next slide. So how did we do our work? As I noted before, we knew that there were some new goals and metrics being developed as part of larger plans, and that our plan had the opportunity and the responsibility to roll up to those larger goals. So we used that idea of a 50%, serving about 50% of the number of folks as our umbrella goal across all of the systems. And we had sort of an estimated number that we were using, and it turned out we were very close. So our numbers, I do think we're going to be very successful. And then within that umbrella goal, we organized ourselves by those systems that I mentioned earlier. So we would have several meetings in a row about the adult system, for example, and work on a strategy for that system, and then move on to the family system. Within those meetings, we reviewed data on existing capacity, we talked about models, and we had really in-depth conversations with our service providers about what they thought the needs were for the people they were serving in their shelters. We also did go to the Lived Experience Advisory Committee and get some feedback from them, and I will speak to some specific feedback from them later on in the presentation. Based on that, we created shelter capacity goals and service goals for each of the systems. Although each system is unique, we actually did land on the same major needs across all 4 systems. So this presentation is actually modeled, or organized, around those 4 buckets of need as opposed to the systems themselves. Finally, as we did our weekly meetings, every other week we met with the steering committee, Dan and myself, and a couple other staffers, and we presented on our progress. What were we talking about in the work group? What did our recommendations look like? We got feedback from the steering committee, and we took their feedback and their thoughts back to the work group as we finalized our recommendations. Next slide. So that's the how, and we're about to get into the what. But before we do that, I'm excited to welcome a speaker. As I said, you're going to hear from our work group and steering committee members throughout the presentation. So I'm excited to welcome Multnomah County Commissioner and steering committee member Julia Brim Edwards to talk about shelter as part of the service ecosystem.
Thank you, Anna and Dan. A foundational premise of the sheltering strategy steering committee and work group is that shelter can be and often is an important step on the path to housing and a part of the system ecosystem. Permanent housing is still the goal, and for many, shelter is the first best step towards housing. Given the crisis on our streets, with record numbers of homelessness in Multnomah County and the record deaths as recorded and reported in domicile unknown, it's important that our strategies and plans evolve. Sleeping on the streets or in an unsanctioned camp means living in many cases without basic services, without showers, bathrooms, laundry, and is often unsafe with little access to behavioral health services, positive peer support, healthcare, or the ability to gain and keep employment. Shelter offers an opportunity to access basic services, a warm, dry, safer place to sleep, and an opportunity for stability so that individuals can get ready for and take their next step on a pathway to housing, treatment, or employment. Because of the work done by community organizations and city leaders, so thank you for everybody who's contributed, we now have new models of shelter that are beginning to meet the many different unique needs of those who have been living on our streets. Those new forms of shelters are not a substitute for the many longtime county and city provider partners. Rather, it's additional and complementary. We continue to need those longtime provider shelter partners. In addition to traditional group shelters, we know that other shelter types are the right fit for others, whether they be teeny houses, safe rest villages, thank you, Commissioner Ryan, converted motels, temporary alternative shelter sites, or non-traditional facilities like Bybee Lakes. And that shelter for individual adults will look different from that for families, youth, and those fleeing domestic violence. The Shelter Strategy Steering Committee and Work Group built out a plan that increases the amount and types of shelter as part of the evolving strategy that recognizes shelter as a critical part of a pathway to housing. And I really want to thank those who served not only on the steering committee with me and the work group, and also to the staff that spent lots of time helping us frame this up and building out this part of the ecosystem that is really important for those and for the county and the city as we build a pathway to housing.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next slide, please. I do want to give a little bit of history and context about shelter in the region, specifically how shelter has changed over time. So the next 3 slides are screenshots from a map that we actually do have online on the Joint Office website that allows you to look at shelter over time. So this is 2015. There are 8 dots on that map representing shelter. They are really mainly focused on downtown and the Central East Side, and they had pretty different policies. The capacity was clearly limited, and they were what we might consider higher barrier than what we have now. Restrictions on couples staying together, for example, not allowing to have pets in some of the facilities, things that we know now prevent folks from wanting to access shelter. Next slide. This is the shelter system in 2021, and I'm pausing in 2021 to give you all, to demonstrate where we got during the COVID-19 pandemic. At this point, we had many more shelters open, and the policies had changed. Many, if not all of them, are open 24 hours. Some of them have beds by reservation. We have villages, and now many of them are welcoming partners and pets. They have places for you to keep your stuff, so really becoming a place that folks are more likely to access. The other thing I want to highlight is that we had spread into motels at this point during the COVID-19 pandemic. So there are now motel shelters as of 2021, and some of those are on that map. Next slide. And here we are in 2024. There are 42 dots on this map. And this actually isn't fully comprehensive. It does not include some of our DSV and behavioral health shelters for privacy reasons. And it also does not include some of the private shelters that are not in our HMIS system. But this does include some of the SRV and task sites, for example, as things have been added. Next slide. This is just another way to look at shelter over time. I know the visualization is really effective, but I know numbers are also quite important. So this is a very specific number. This is beds funded in the Joint Office revised budget from 2017 through 2025. From 1,000 beds in 2017 to over 3,200 in the FY 2025 submitted budget. That is an over 200% increase, and it's actually even a 95% increase from 2021. So significant additions to our system in the last several years. So I do want to be clear, you're going to see a different number in a minute, and I know it gets confusing when our numbers change. These are specifically beds in the Joint Office of Homeless Services budget. There are beds funded by other jurisdictions that you do not see in this specific slide that you will see represented later. And I want to be clear again, and I'll say this a few more times, the 2025 numbers are just our ask. That is just what's in our budget so far, and there are still some beds that are being negotiated about where they might land, and so they do not show up in this slide right now. Next slide, please. This is another way to look at that same information of beds in the Joint Office budget over time. This allows you to see that the bulk of those beds have been and still are in the adult system. I do want to give one more caveat about the shelter beds. This is what it looks like now. We do know that we have some sites that may need to move. And so this is where we are now, but as we move forward and add beds, we are aware and we are planning for how to make sure that as we flex and adapt, we do not lose beds over time. Next slide. Okay, this is a different set of numbers, and these are the numbers that I want you to focus on for today. So I apologize for a little bit of a switch around there. This is looking at all of the publicly funded beds in our region. And I want to talk about sort of where we are and then where we hope to get. So that first column is current capacity. These are beds that are budgeted and the facility is open. And that total is 2,692 budgeted beds. The second column is beds that are already in a budget, but the facility is not yet open. A lot of these are beds that were added in the CAP and unanticipated revenue mid-year last year. When those are added, we will be up to 3,247 beds in the community. The third column is what the community shelter strategy is proposing to add in a 2-year period. So the community sheltering strategy work group and steering committee are recommending an additional 505 beds, which would bring the community up to 3,752 beds by the end of 2025. I do want to point out that both the adult system and the youth system include recommendations for culturally specific shelter. That recommendation in the youth system is actually for 25 beds of culturally specific shelter for immigrant and refugee youth. And I'm going to talk more about the culturally specific recommendation in the adult system in a few slides. Next slide, please. This is a little more detail on the adult system. Within the adult system, we're proposing to add 250 total beds, but we did come up with some recommendations on the configuration of those beds by model as well. To come up with this configuration, we did look at our data that we have on length of stay, who is being served in those shelters, their exits to housing, information like that, to help us land upon what we thought might be a good configuration for those 250 beds. But I do want to be really clear that both the work group and the steering committee really want to put out in the world that we think this configuration is flexible. It's a recommendation, but it might change. We have a lot of new shelter models out there, and we're learning what's working and what is the best and most efficient way to get folks into housing. So while we put out these recommendations for a model, this is a place where we feel like flexibility may need to be involved. We may decide as we learn and grow that this configuration should change slightly depending on needs and circumstances. Next slide. So I know that at first glance, 500 beds doesn't seem like a lot. So I do want to talk about who we think we will serve with those additional beds. With the 805 planned and new beds in the adult system, that would serve about 1,300 people a year. The additional 150 units in the family system would serve 300 households a year. An additional 80 units in the DSV system would serve 175 households. And those 25 beds in the youth system would serve 75 individuals. So this is an annual number. 1,850 people would be served annually with these beds. That being said, the 2,700 is a 2-year goal, and we will be talking about phasing these beds in over time. So this is a place where I want to pause and say, clearly, sheltering will play a huge role in serving that goal of 2,700 people served with housing or shelter, but it will not be the only thing that gets us to that goal. Once these beds are online, we'll be serving, if we were just to do this annually, that would meet the goal, but that's not going to happen all at once. And again, sheltering is one piece of this community breadth of services that will be alongside outreach directly into housing, treatment, and other things that will help people along their journey to housing. Next slide. So those are the units that we hope to add, and I do want to pause and talk about sort of overarching goals for our sheltering system. And you will see this top line on all of the documents that we produced about the system. As I said before, this strategy ties into many of our community goals, but it also aligns with the Joint Office's values around leading with race and ensuring that our services are accessible to everyone, including people with non-dominant culture identities. So for that reason, it is crucial that all of our services are culturally responsive, trauma-informed, and accessible. But you have to have specific practices to meet those goals. And so I want to highlight a little bit about the culturally specific recommendations we are making as a part of the strategy recommendations. I talked about the shelter for youth, and I want to talk a little bit about the recommendation that within those adult beds, there is culturally specific shelter for our LGBTQIA2S+ community. As I mentioned earlier, early on in our process, one of our facilitators from HMA met with the Lived Experience Advisory Committee, and they talked to the advisory committee about this strategy, and they asked them for their feedback on the sheltering system and the needs of the system. One of the primary takeaways from the Lived Experience Advisory Committee was a deep concern about the experiences of our LGBTQIA2S+ community in shelter, specifically that of our transgender folks. And they had a very specific recommendation for culturally specific shelter for that community. We brought that recommendation back to the work group, and they immediately and heartily agreed that this was a need in the system. And so we built that recommendation into our strategy quite early in our process. As I mentioned, the Joint Office had also commissioned a policy paper from a housing collaborative, the LGBTQIA2S+ Housing Collaborative, and they recently issued that paper, and it included the same recommendation. So this is a place where the work group recommendations really do align with other goals in the community. And then finally, we just want to put out there, and we agree that this is what is happening, is that shelter has to be integrated into a larger system of care through improved communication and coordination with healthcare, housing, benefits, and other systems. And we really feel that the sheltering strategy as a part of this homelessness response action plan will be really party and benefit from that system and coordination. Next slide. Those are our specific goals around units, and now we're going to talk about the services. But before we dive in, the ultimate goal, as we all know, is that shelter serves as a pathway to housing. So to speak about this, I'd like to welcome Portland City Commissioner and Steering Committee Member Dan Ryan to talk about shelter as a pathway to housing.
Thank you, Anna, and also thank you, Dan Phil. That was a great presentation. I also want to thank the staff leadership who met many, many times in between our meetings and move this along. And then to my colleagues to the left, it was fun to think out loud with all three of you in the shelter meetings that we had. They always seem to be at Friday at 4, really great time to be fresh and clear with one another. Anyway, when the mayor gave me this dotted line assignment to be the representative from the city, the county's joint office in the fall of 2020, such a topic as shelters was really not a deep dive, or you never think that we'd be at a place today where we're doing a deep dive in a real action plan. So I have a lot of gratitude that 3.5 years later, I'm experiencing a collective voice to get on the same page that recognize this as something that's necessary. It was very challenging during that time, and I just want to do a little bit of history because there were times where I know Commissioner Myron and I just felt strategically hushed in meetings when we would merely mention the fact that, have you not noticed there's an increasing number of people on our streets that have access to cheap and very poisonous drugs? And this is not the plan of 10 years ago, the Housing First plan. We have to rethink our strategy. And it was rough. And I just think it's important to have a little bit of history to notice that happened. And now we're here today, united. And it took a lot of courage and persistence for some of us to hang in there to get to this point, and I'm very grateful for that. I think that what we're trying to say is that this is a day to celebrate, and as anyone knows, a transition to housing space, when you're coming from a very difficult circumstance, people that advocate for those coming out of prison understand how necessary that on-ramp is. You can go into other public sector units like education, and we know that when families are challenged at home in the pre-K years, it's really important to have a robust pre-K system. So when they enter the K-12 system, they can be ready to learn. You know that, right, Chair Praget Peterson? And so it was just really important that we together get to a place to understand that having anywhere from 3 months to 9 months in a safe, keyword safe setting, where you can build that trust, where you can go from that lack of stability to build resilience, to do a real assessment on one's behavioral health and mental health, to look at if they will, when will they be ready for the workforce, to do that type of thorough assessment before having them move into housing with services, maybe with not. We don't know. The truth is, going from people living chronically homeless with multiple addictions on the streets and plopping them into housing with not a thorough assessment process wasn't working, and we all knew that. And so it's just great today that we're here looking at inserting this into the continuum of services, and I'm grateful for that. So today I accept the transition that has been an on-ramp as a key component to an improving system. This system has needed this for some time, and so today I have more hope than I have at any time in my 3.5 years as a public servant. And at this moment, I'm experiencing a united local government that is responsive to our voters, to our taxpayers, and most importantly, to those who continue to have a very miserable experience on our streets. Thank you for taking shelters seriously as a key component of this system. The more people who are off the streets and move into stability, the more hope we all have for a prosperous Multnomah County. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, and as you heard from Chris and Sky, the Homelessness Response Action Plan includes a goal to increase exits from shelter to permanent housing by 15%. This is a visualization of what that would look like across the 4 population systems. In FY23, 26% of adults exited shelter to permanent housing. The goal is to increase that by 15% to 41%. The smaller systems have higher proportions of exits to housing, 56% in both the family and the DSV system and 60% in the youth system. For the youth system, that is their sort of longer-term sheltering program. They have a crisis nightly shelter that looks very differently, and that number is for their longer-term sheltering program. We did discuss in the work group what goals would be feasible for the different systems, and you can see the increased goal is slightly smaller for the DSV and the youth system. For the DSV system, that has to do with very specific legal barriers that are faced by people surviving domestic and sexual violence, so they thought that was a more rational increase for their system, but the ultimate goal is 15% across the entire system. Next slide, please. But of course, you can't just say you're going to have more access to permanent housing. You have to provide the resources that will help people exit to housing. So a lot of the time in our work group, we spent talking about what services were needed, not just in any new shelter units, but in all of our shelters across the system to ensure that A, the shelters were a safe and welcome environment, and B, they served as an efficient pathway to housing. We landed on 4 major service recommendation areas that we're going to walk through now. Next slide, please. The first recommendation was around staffing and case management. To speak on this theme, I'd like to welcome Multnomah County Commissioner and Steering Committee member, Commissioner Lori Stegman.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Dan, for both of you for being here and your entire teams. I really appreciate it, and thank you to my fellow commissioners for working together. So as we've heard today, the sheltering strategy being presented today is just one integral part of a robust homelessness response system. As a steering committee member, it was important for me to create a strategy where homelessness is rare and brief. A successful shelter, in my mind, is one that allows for immediate safety and then stabilization, which ultimately results in long-term housing. Having a plan for what we need to do is paramount, but equally important is how we implement that plan. We know that when shelters are welcoming, safe, and supportive, people are more likely to engage in services. To meet this goal, it takes the right people. Time and time again, I hear about the critical role that our service providers and their workforce play to connect people to resources. Both the work group and the Joint Office of Homeless Services Lived Experience Advisory Committee echoed this sentiment, emphasizing what a huge difference shelter staff can make by developing meaningful relationships that demonstrate care and build trust. Shelter operations staff are foundational in creating a safe space where guests feel a sense of belonging and well-being. In order to maintain a calm and welcoming presence, it is vital to have enough staff on site. When staff is not overwhelmed, they can better de-escalate conflicts and give individual attention to those in need. And oftentimes, just being able to take the time to stop and listen to someone can make a huge difference. When people feel welcomed and safe, they are more likely to stay, which allows them the time needed to stabilize and move one step closer towards housing. And for BIPOC, LGBTQIA2+, and other guests from marginalized identities who are disproportionately represented within our houseless communities, this feeling of safety and belonging is particularly crucial for their well-being, which is why we have prioritized culturally specific and relevant peers and service providers. Not only do we depend on operational staff, but we also rely on on-site case managers. We know that case managers serve as an on-ramp for housing. People have a variety of needs, and caseloads matter. Navigating through the complicated administrative tasks to access housing can be daunting. Overloaded case managers may not be able to take the time they need to build trust and develop the relationships needed to help people experiencing multiple layers of trauma. When case managers have adequate time to work with each person as needed, they are able to give people the attention and humanity they deserve, and we know outcomes are much better. I was pleased to see the work group's recommendations for these increased staffing ratios for our shelters, and I fully support this recommendation. We all know that adequate staffing is fundamental to the success of our sheltering strategy.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next slide, please. There's honestly not much I can add to that, except to confirm that the work group was very clear that staffing infrastructure is crucial to every aspect of sheltering. As noted on the slide, better operations staffing leads to increasing safety and comfort, including for marginalized groups, and that better case management ratio allows for better pathways to support folks on their way to housing. As the commissioner mentioned, this did come up as important from our Lived Experience Advisory Committee. When they were expressing their concerns around safety in shelters, they linked that to staffing levels and talked about staffing levels as an issue as well. So this also aligns with recommendations from that group. So the work group decided to make specific recommendations around staffing ratios for both shelter operations and for case management, and you can see those ratios here on the slide. To land on these, we did look at national best practices, and we also discussed the specific needs of those smaller systems with folks from those systems. Next slide. The next recommendation of the work group focuses on permanent supportive housing. The connection to shelter here is that permanent supportive housing is crucial to folks' ability to exit shelters into a housing that is sustainable for them. It's also crucial to the sustainability of the system overall. Before I dive in, I'd like to welcome Portland City Commissioner and Steering Committee member Carmen Rubio to speak about permanent supportive housing.
Thank you, Anna. It's good to be here today co-introducing these recommendations related to permanent supportive housing. The proposals that you will hear about in a moment from staff are critical to stabilizing our current and future. Collaboration. Okay. The proposals you will hear about in a moment from staff are critical to stabilizing our current and future PSH units and making sure that we have enough supportive housing available for the people who need it. As staff will share in a moment, one of the proposals on the table is to increase the annual operating subsidy that goes to housing providers so they can provide the types of wraparound services that residents of PSH units need. The team at Portland Housing Bureau often hears about the challenges that housing providers face meeting the needs of their residents, much more so today than in years past. And we know that our behavioral health challenges, some of which are connected to the fentanyl crisis, are contributing factors. We also know that we need to create more PSH units to make sure that there is an appropriate option available for folks who are ready for it when they're ready for it. There are new PSH units in development pipeline right now, funded by our 2 local bonds that will be opening in the coming years, and we need SHS funding for services and rent assistance. We also know that there is existing affordable housing that is serving the same types of extremely low income, high acuity population as PSH units, but that was built before the ballot measure and before our current definition of PSH. These units are not receiving the support they need to provide the appropriate level of services to the residents. So I'm hopeful that as we continue to have these conversations around increasing PSH units, we can also talk about converting existing units into PSH. I'm really excited and, given what we know, very relieved to see that this is included in the strategy and to learn that the joint offices submitted budget proposals for the chair to consider as she builds her recommended budget for the coming fiscal year. So thanks to the team for all the great work on this and the collaboration, and we'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next slide, please. So the work group had 2 recommendations around permanent supportive housing. First, to increase the number of permanent supportive housing units in the adult and the family and the DSV systems. And second, to increase the per household services cap. The first recommendation, increase in units, is related to 2 system goals. Of course, it is related to increasing exits in housing, because that means more units for folks to enter in as they leave shelter. But it's also related to that larger goal that you see at the top of the slide, which is increasing our system's capacity to match the services to the needs of the individuals. Right now, permanent supportive housing is a limited resource, and that means that someone might be housed using a program that is not PSH and is therefore not as intensive as that person might need. They may be using a resource that doesn't have the level of services they really need to be successful. So this is related not only to exits, but also to sustaining people in housing. If we have more units, we have a higher ability to match folks to the resources they really need to stay in housing. The recommendation to increase the per household services cap is also related primarily to retention in permanent supportive housing, which is a goal of the Homelessness Response Action Plan and just a goal for all of us, I am sure. It's also to ensure that permanent supportive housing is a sustainable resource for our community. Right now, the services cap per household is $10,000 per household. This funding pays for basically very flexible, very specialized tenant-based services, staffing to support people who are in their housing. That could be help getting to appointments. That could be benefits acquisition, income acquisition, eviction prevention, all things really tailored to the needs of that person. Right now, across the country and in Portland, providers of PSH are experiencing sharp increases in client acuity, making it difficult to adequately serve people at that $10,000 service level. That means that sometimes programs and people are going into crisis. And when that happens, it takes a human toll both on the folks in that housing and on the staff and on the permanent supportive housing projects themselves. By increasing the funding cap, we can provide a helping hand to the folks in the housing, the providers, and to our entire permanent supportive housing system. As Commissioner Rubio noted, permanent supportive housing is a crucial pillar of our system, and the workroom recommendations around this are another area where our recommendations really align with those across the system. Permanent supportive housing is a key part of our work under the Supportive Housing Services measure, and the Joint Office has been increasing permanent supportive housing steadily using that measure since it began, and we will continue to do so. And as well, when we were developing the recommendations around the services funding cap, we also began to hear that from our other partners, affordable housing developers, providers, and our elected officials. And our own staff were already working on their own recommendation around this increase. So this is an area where this per household services cap recommendation and the unit recommendation really aligns with lots of other community groups. Next slide. Of course, there are other kinds of housing assistance, and the work group also identified rapid rehousing as a crucial need. To speak a little bit to the importance of rapid rehousing, I'd like to welcome Brandy Tuck, the Executive Director of Path Home and a member of our work group.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, Chair Vega-Peterson, Mayor Wheeler, and the rest of the city and county commissioners. I am grateful to be here. I'm Brandy Tuck, and for the last 17 years, I've been Executive Director of Path Home. We empower homeless families with children to get back into housing and stay there. We operate Family Village, which is the first shelter in Oregon featuring trauma-informed design and architecture. We operate homeless prevention, a basic income guarantee, and most importantly, a rapid rehousing program. Rapid rehousing is an evidence-based practice that has 3 components to it. The first is to minimize the amount of time that someone experiences homelessness and move them quickly back into permanent housing. The second component is to provide rent assistance to people to help them stabilize in that housing. And the third component is to provide intensive relationships-based case management to help people keep their housing for good. And when fully implemented, this evidence-based practice of rapid rehousing works. It's how Houston has reduced homelessness by 50% in the last 10 years, and it's why Path Home gets such great outcomes. 90% of the people that stay in our shelter move back into permanent housing. It takes an average of only 3 months to get people into housing, and 87% of the people we serve keep their housing for good. And the reason we have such success is because we fully implement this evidence-based practice of providing long-term relationships-based case management to help people keep their housing. This is surprisingly an uncommon approach and is one of the biggest pieces of ensuring that our housing strategy works. The biggest concern that I hear when we talk about rapid rehousing is people say, but we don't have enough housing. And while it is true that we don't have enough affordable housing for people who make no or low incomes, it's not true that we don't have enough total housing. There are 6,000 units of available apartments that are available tonight in Portland, Oregon. They're just not affordable to people that make no or low income. So if we employed a rapid rehousing strategy, we could house people in these units, provide relationships-based case management, address whatever behavioral health, mental health, domestic violence advocacy is going on, provide employment training, and lead these people and these households to long-term housing stability.
Thank you, Brandy. Next slide, please. So, as Brandy shared, rapid rehousing is a very vital tool to helping folks leave shelter for permanent housing. All 4 of the systems had recommendations around increases in rapid rehousing, but they did differ slightly per system. In the adult system, as of right now, not all of our shelters have access to rapid rehousing rental assistance. We know that it makes a difference because we can see those shelters that do have robust rapid rehousing programs have much higher exits to housing. So for the adult system, the recommendation was quite simply to ensure that all of the shelters have access to rapid rehousing funding to help folks exit into housing. Within the family and the DSV system, there was a focus on increasing the ability to serve folks both in terms of number but also timeline. Specifically within the family system, rapid rehousing by definition can go up to 24 months. Right now, because of the amount of funding and the number of folks who need that funding, our family system is serving folks more on an average of 4 to 6 months. So their ask was very specifically, we need longer timelines to help folks become more stable before they lose that rent assistance. In the youth system, there was an ask to serve 115 more folks a year with rapid rehousing, but also to consider potentially longer timelines outside of that 2-year frame for rapid rehousing. That has to do with some specific legal barriers, again, folks faced by survivors of domestic and sexual violence that makes that stabilization period a little bit longer. And then in the youth system, the ask was to increase 100 households a year being served with rapid rehousing. Next slide, please. Our final recommendation was around behavioral health access in shelters. To speak a little bit on this theme, I'd like to welcome Amy Thompson, who is the Supportive Services Director for NARA Northwest and served on our work group.
Hello, good morning. My name is Amy Thompson. I'm the Director of Housing Services with NARA Northwest. I just want to say thank you very much to both the city and county leaders for coming together to address this issue. It's very important. And it is very important for service providers to see the city and county working together, so thank you very much. I think we're all aware of the interconnected crises of substance abuse, mental health, affordable housing, and homelessness, and the shortage of resources. And while housing is generally the key component, having affordable housing available, having behavioral health services attached to housing, attached to shelter, attached to outreach, it's really needed throughout the whole spectrum of services for people experiencing houselessness. So this includes behavioral health outreach services in shelter settings and also on the streets. Speaking on behalf of NARA Northwest, most of the individuals we serve do not access shelters. And so there's really a significant need for behavioral health focused outreach as well. One of the greatest needs that we see is quick and same day access to detox, to substance use disorder treatment and mental health services. We work with a lot of individuals who want detox, they want to get into treatment, but the wait times are so long and the means to access those services creates so many barriers that it becomes very difficult. So having these services on site in shelter systems would be extremely helpful. And even if that is just outreach workers who are connecting people to those services. And the other thing I want to share, I could share a lot of success stories about NARA's outreach teams and connecting people to services and getting them into treatment and into housing. I want to focus instead on a story of some of the challenges. It represents the challenges we face. NARA has a staff person that provides in-reach services into shelters, and she was able to connect with an individual I'll call Ashley. Ashley is in her mid-30s. She has been homeless pretty much all of her adult life. She has polysubstance abuse issues, significant mental health issues, chronic medical health issues, and she really wants treatment. And when staff met with her and said, we want to help you get into housing, she said, no, I want residential treatment first. If I go into housing, I'm going to blow out of housing. I won't be successful. I need to get to residential treatment. So staff said, okay, we'll work on that first then. But we weren't able to find a treatment site that could meet all of her needs. And we could get her through detox and into treatment, and twice she got into a treatment setting. Her medical needs were such that she was discharged back to the street from residential treatment because they couldn't meet her medical needs. So we have finally convinced her to try housing first so that she can get into housing, hopefully stabilize those medical needs, and then pursue treatment. And we're just really hopeful that will work out. She was recently placed into housing, but we know it's a very tenuous situation for her. It's very challenging for her to maintain that housing. And we are providing the intensive wraparound services, in hopes of giving the best outcome, but really that need for accessible treatment options that are designed to meet people where they're at and with their various needs is critical. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Next slide. So the overarching recommendation was the same across all 4 of the population systems, which is to ensure that all sites have access to some kind of regular on-site behavioral health support. Devise a way to make sure this is possible. Of course, that overarching recommendation could look very differently depending on the shelter. The needs of a family shelter would be quite different, for example, than the needs of an adult shelter. We did keep these recommendations relatively high level at this point, but we did talk about this recommendation is not that all of those 42 dots have their own full-time behavioral health person. That's probably not feasible, but thinking about how could the population systems work together? Is there a mobile resource that we could expand to serve the whole family system, for example, or the whole DSV system? So there were some seeds of ideas of how we could implement this in the work group. Next slide. That is an overview of the units and the service goals, and they are ambitious. So the next step was to assess how do we turn this into reality. So the Joint Office did some work to think about what is the cost of everything we're recommending, what budgets do we have, what revenues are available, what trade-offs, what we have to make. And we came back to the work group and talked about what might it look like to phase this in over the 2-year period. And we talked with the work group about if we were to phase it in, what makes the most sense to you as service providers and experts, and we developed a 2-phase plan. Next slide. This is an overview of the high-level 2-phase plan for implementing this strategy. And the messaging from the work group was to focus on infrastructure first. Yes, of course, add units. So they recommend to add half of the 500 units in the first year, but really to focus on supporting the infrastructure, both of the shelters and the community. They asked that we focus on rebasing and getting those staffing ratios first, and as well to support that permanent supportive housing recommendation as infrastructure for the whole system that would support the shelters and their exits to housing. They did recommend some rapid rehousing, primarily because, as you heard from Brandy, those smaller systems rely more on rapid rehousing than permanent supportive housing, so to make sure they are brought along in that first year as well. And then in year 2, to focus on adding resources, adding those additional 250 units, thinking about how to add more rapid rehousing, and focusing on that behavioral health implementation. Next slide. Oh, yeah, go ahead, next slide. So then we had to figure out how do we do this financially. So the Joint Office actually worked to build several aspects of the recommendation into our FY 2025 budget ask. I will go over that now. To be very clear, this is just our submitted budget. This is what we have submitted to the chair, and she is currently considering many, many things, and her budget will be released later. So this is just our ask. This is what we've submitted at this point, and there's a lot of budget process to go. But we submitted in 4 major areas. First, we are including the increase in both permanent supportive housing units and the services cap increase. We have added 250 shelter units. We are starting, asking to start that contract rebasing and adding some more rapid rehousing out of shelter. Next slide. When I talk about adding 250 shelter units, this is what the Joint Office has built into their budget ask for the next year, and these recommendations are based on several things. We are recommending to add 90 additional units in the adult system, including that culturally specific shelter for LGBTQIA2S+ adults, 45 additional units in the DSV system, that 25-unit culturally specific shelter for immigrant and refugee youth, and 90 additional units of shelter in the family shelter system. The estimated operations cost for FY25 is $9.3 million. This body of beds, this 250, and how we recommend they be configured really reflects the work group's recommendations, as well as the Joint Office's commitment to racial equity and the priority populations in the Homelessness Response Action Plan. When deciding how we might phase in the units, we asked for funds, although there are significant beds in the adult system, but we also wanted to make sure we added beds in our smaller systems. Those systems serve high proportions of people of color, which will help us meet our goals in reducing the disparities of folks experiencing homelessness from our populations of color in our community. The focus on culturally specific shelter for LGBTQIA2S+ adults, as I noted, really aligns with the community recommendations, and it also addresses the priority population called out in the Homelessness Response Action Plan. Next slide. As noted, I am very excited to say that the Joint Office 2025 budget ask does include both increases in permanent supportive housing and an increase in the per household services cap. The FY 2025 budget ask would fund over 3,000 units of permanent supportive housing with SHS and federal funding, including 401 new units. If those units are funded, that would bring the total number of new units since the implementation of the SHS measure to 1,900, and it's actually 1. I'm sorry, that's a typo. It's 1901, not 10. And that brings us up to 85% of the local implementation plan goal. And we did build in an increase to that per household services cap. As I noted, right now that funding is $10,000 per household. We are recommending moving that base up to $15,000 a household, but there would be a $17,500 premium for 3 categories of permanent supportive housing. any culturally specific permanent supportive housing, family permanent supportive housing, and any unit that is in a building that has 25% or more of those units as PSH. All three of those categories of household would be eligible for $17.5 thousand per household in addition to that, higher than the 15,000 base. Thanks. The cost of that for FY25 is $18.5 million. Next slide. We are also focusing on that staffing infrastructure in our FY 2025 ask. Specifically, the Joint Office is focusing on rebasing some of our legacy shelter contracts. These are contracts that have been in the system for a very long time, where what we are paying them has not kept up with the actual cost of doing that service. So this would be rebasing those contracts for those providers whose contract right now are insufficiently low to provide the recommended staffing levels. And that includes providers in all four of the systems at a cost of $10.5 million. Next slide. Finally, we are including some additional rapid rehousing in this year's budget. Rapid rehousing would be emphasized more in phase 2, but there is some included here. And to be clear, there was already significant amounts of rapid rehousing in the Joint Office budget, and we will talk about that more when we get to budget work sessions. But we wanted to make sure we added some additionally as a part of this strategy. Again, this relates to the fact that that rapid rehousing resource is used a lot by our family, youth, and DSV systems. And if we are adding units in those systems, we need to make sure those shelters and our existing shelters are resourced to help people exit those shelters to housing. So this budget ask adds $5.6 million in rapid rehousing linked to the community sheltering strategy, but that is in addition to existing funding that already focuses on placement out of shelter. So it is in addition to existing funding. Next slide. Okay, you have really hung in there. We are almost done. But I really want to take a minute to highlight the pride that we have in the work group and the work that we produced and the partnership that we exhibited as we walked through this project. One of the goals was to demonstrate and practice that community partnership. So to speak to this, I actually would like to invite two folks. First, we have Jessica Harper, the Director of Livability Services from the City of Gresham, who was in our work group. And then Commissioner Stegman will also speak again.
Thanks, Anna. Good morning, everyone. My name's Jessica Harper. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Director of Livability Services for the City of Gresham. I know it's been a long morning, so I'm going to keep this brief. I was happy to be a member of the work group for this important strategy, and I really appreciated that opportunity. Like in Portland, the homelessness crisis impacts Gresham and the cities in East County every single day. And it's really critical to our community and the others in East County to be a part of the solutions for this problem. Thanks to investments by the county and the Joint Office, our homeless services team at the City of Gresham works 6 days a week to provide outreach and rapid rehousing, which Brandy so eloquently explained as a critical component of this work. We do that 6 days a week to help people out of homelessness in Gresham. And a huge part of that work is, contingent, our success is contingent on having access to shelter. And especially important to us is having access to shelter beds that are located in our community. So this, we're appreciative of this effort. It feels like the right step to be taking as a county-wide group, and Gresham appreciates being included in it to ensure that there's a strategy for this, the implementation of additional shelter beds and rooms. And it is our hope that that includes the thought about geographic equity and where these assets are located county-wide, because that's an important aspect for the people in East County as well. And then also just access to those beds. There are a number of shelters in Gresham that our team have a hard time getting into, and we understand there's a huge need everywhere, but access to those beds is critically important for us. So we appreciate the growing partnership between the City of Gresham and the Joint Office. Under Dan and Anna's leadership, we're very confident that we will be a part of these conversations going forward, and that hasn't always been the case, so that feels like a big, important step for the city, and we really appreciate that collaboration. Just happy to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Jessica. It's great to have you here. Thank you for your service on the work group, and thank you, Brandy and Amy, as well. I really appreciate Multnomah County and City of Gresham's longstanding partnership with us on this issue. And as the Commissioner for East Multnomah County, I agree that real involvement with our partners is crucial, especially in cities to our east where homelessness has unique challenges. I'm proud to have led efforts to strengthen the partnership between Multnomah County departments and leadership and the East County cities, and I know that much more is to come. The feedback and recommendations from this work group were foundational to the community sheltering strategy before you today. Meeting every other week with my colleagues on the steering committee for these past few months on a Friday afternoon, we were able to pressure test their recommendations, ask critical questions, and make suggestions. We were able to have honest conversations about concerns, limitations, strengths, and weaknesses, and where we as a community need to focus our resources. It is that kind of collaboration and productive approach that we must embrace to get this right. Homelessness is a community issue. It will take our entire community and all of our systems working in tandem to solve it. I'm proud of the process that went into building and designing this strategy, and I fully support the recommendations of the work group and the Joint Office of Homeless Services. I hope that my colleagues here today will also support this important work as each of our jurisdictions enter our respective budget seasons and prioritize funding for this unified strategy.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, last slide. So I just wanted to say we've had a really amazing time working in partnership collaboratively on designing this community-wide sheltering strategy, and we hope to further this work by working with an expanded network of partners. But I want to reiterate that the focus of this work is to strategically add shelter that will serve as a pathway to housing while building community partnership. As noted multiple times, reducing homelessness is a whole community effort, and shelter needs to be integrated into that effort as part of a larger system. So this strategy should really be thought of one of the pillars and components of the Homelessness Response Action Plan that you heard about earlier, that will work alongside all of the community partners being pulled together by the chair and the mayor and all of you to help us reduce homelessness in the region. Thank you.
Thank you. Yay, thank you so much. That was a pretty impressive presentation with a ton of detail, so thank you so much for all of the time that went into developing that. Thanks again to all of the commissioners who were participating in that, as well as all of our community members, some of whom are here today, who went into developing this plan. So next we're going to take about a 10-minute break. We're going to start promptly at 11:10, and then we'll move into the discussion and questions for these boards. So we will go ahead and be in recess for 10 minutes and reconvene. Thank you. Thanks. Hello again, everybody. So really appreciate the great information, the really good presentations that we had at the first part of this meeting. Now we're going to open it up for questions and comments from the city and county commissioners. Since there are so many of us, I can't even imagine how you're going to be doing it with 12 people next year, but since there are so many of us here today, we're going to have about 6 minutes each for people. I know that's, a lot of information. I know some folks have already submitted some questions for follow-up and response. So if we don't get a chance to get all the questions answered or have everything covered, we definitely will have more opportunities to respond in the future. And I know that's the commitment staff will make. So Commissioner Myron, we will go ahead and start with you at your end of the table.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the staff and who has put so many hours into doing this work, preparing this report, and to the chair and mayor for working on this, and to my colleagues who are working on this as well. I'm speaking today from the perspective of someone who has directly worked on the front line in multiple capacities and for decades with people along the homelessness continuum. I've convened the people impacted, frontline workers, mutual aid providers, leaders, consumers, regularly. Not as a one-off or because I need something from them for a report, but because I care about them, trust them, know them, and deeply value their opinions. I know how disempowered and disconnected they often feel, and I've had more people than I can say tell me how challenged they are at being asked to provide their honest perspective when the people asking for it are those that fund them and when they have faced retaliation in the past. This is where my perspective of speak your mind, even if your voice shakes, has risen to the top of my favorite quotes, because I think I'm going to be a lone voice here today, but it is representing a lot of experience. The plan described today is not new. It is the latest in a litany of Portland and Multnomah County collaborative efforts to end homelessness. Plans recycled for decades that have involved too many sectors and stakeholders to count. If you say this plan is new or there's anything new about it, you have not done your homework. The former plans are easy to summarize because they all basically say the same thing. They use all the same words. Homelessness is complicated. It's multifaceted. It's happened over decades. We need to focus on prevention, outreach, shelter, and housing. We acknowledge there's no easy fix. We can't do it alone. We need unprecedented cross-government and cross-sector collaboration and coordination. We need data, accountability, and a bunch of committees. We have a bunch of goals and action items, and then we need to build on the excellent work that has come before. This isn't rocket science, yet despite the city and county investing billions of dollars into these plans since 1986, all of them have failed and left our city and county worse off. More people dying on our streets. Say, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, and 3 times, and 4 times, shame on us. We should learn from history or we're destined to repeat it. And we clearly have not learned here because history is screaming at us, don't do another homelessness plan in this way. The only thing new about this plan is it has more inconsistency. I was much more confused reading it, and it seems much vaguer than prior versions. I'm going to give 3 examples because we are so limited in time here, and I want these to be emblematic. First, the ambitious goal of having unsheltered homelessness by the end of next year. That goal is absurdly unrealistic, both by our history, think Housing Multnomah Now, think the recent articles about not getting money out for our day centers, think the math, the numbers of shelters we have, and then saying we're only getting 13% of people housed, 13%, 87% failure rate from our adult congregate shelters. It's not an ambitious goal. It's sort of a made-up number that sounds good. The second issue is shelter. Thousands of hours, untold money into a shelter strategy and different kinds of shelter, yet I've asked for two basic numbers for years now. And as of yesterday, no one could tell me the numbers. Number one, how many physical beds are available for people to be in, not budgeted, not capacity, not average daily utilization? How many physical beds can a human being occupy? Number two, how many currently physical human beings are occupying those beds? We literally do not have the answer to that, and yet we're rolling out strategic plans and talking about this. And not only could that not be answered, but 3 different numbers are in even the materials we've been given for this presentation alone. We're moving the baseline, we're moving the target, we're asking for 1,000 beds, but saying we're going to put in 555 we've already sort of budgeted for and paid for, and we're supposed to be there, but we'll count those toward the 1,000. It doesn't add up. And finally, the big picture, the statement that we're building on success of previous efforts. If success is a 13% success rate, or even less, 26% moving from shelter into housing, that means 74% of people aren't. That is not success. These exits are extremely concerning, and I would say before jumping into this plan where we create the strategy, how about we focus like a laser on that and get to the heart of it and figure it out? How about we do something about that? Data. We don't have incredible foundational data. Our dashboards don't contain meaningful information. Our data is not getting better, but it's the crux of so much work. When we say 99% of people in our SHS measure housing retain that housing, it's not something we should pat ourselves on the back for. It is an absurdly unrealistic number that warrants deep investigation.
Thank you, Commissioner Myron.
Okay, I'd just like to close that I desperately wanted to like this plan. I've been pressing for a lot of the concepts for years. I wanted to find something redeeming, but I think this tries to capitalize on the public's desperation, all of our desperation for collaboration and progress, by marketing a recycled product and hoping the public won't notice. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Mapps.
Thank you very much. I want to start out today by thanking everyone who presented this morning. Also, I know lots of people have been working behind the scenes for months, if not years, to try to get us to the moment where we're at. I'm deeply grateful for that. And although I have some questions, I think we've made some significant progress. I largely actually want to have a little bit of dialogue with staff. So if maybe Sky and Dan Field, if you could come forward, I'll try to be efficient, and I promise I will not be particularly mean this morning. And some of these are requests that, maybe we can answer some of these quickly. Some, if not, we can have an ongoing dialogue. One of the things that would be helpful to me, which I didn't really get today or didn't get clearly, I feel like these two documents, I'm not clear if these two documents completely nest together. So, for example, just to answer, and I think Commissioner Myron has some of the same questions, if I could have a table that just shows how we get to our goal of housing 2,699 with a table in which particular spaces they're going to be in. I see some tables that gesture towards that, but frankly, the math that I see here doesn't exactly pencil out. And so I'm not clear if this is just, if we're trying to actually solve the equation today, or if we're just showing how we can make significant progress in that space. Sky, one thing which wasn't addressed today, we heard some, the county talk about its, the budget implications. Do we have any sense of what the budget implications for the city to participate in this particular plan looks like?
Yeah, so quickly, I will say you will get more tables, basically, and that'll be part of that work plan. So yes, you will get a lot more detail on that, and I know Anna and her team are working on that as well.
Okay.
In terms of budget implications, the city, I won't get too deep in the weeds, but the city recently, the mayor sent a letter to the chair in terms of our current, the CAL, current appropriation level for this next fiscal year is about 29 million, a little over 29 million that we are going to be sending to the county. That is lower kind of than we've sent before because we don't have those one-time resources or the ARPA funding that we've sent in the past. So I believe last year it was about 43 million total, and now we're sending that 29 million. We actually walked through with Dan and his team and Antoinette Payne on the Joint Office team yesterday where that 29 million is going, and we're going to be really excited to share that spreadsheet with you with something we haven't seen before, and we're really excited about it. So they walked us through how many shelter beds we're funding with that money and exactly the numbers kind of that are being funded. So we'll walk you through that spreadsheet as soon as we have it.
Great. And in the whatever 2 minutes that I have left, maybe we can have a conversation probably between the two of you. One of the things that it's not clear to me from the presentation today is that Is the joint office itself changing or evolving? We're setting up, for example, a new governance structure that seems to touch on a bunch of or things that historically have been done within the joint office space. I'm not sure if the joint office remains unchanged if we move in this direction, or if the joint office is just now one of a number of players. And the other question that I'd like to hear more about is what are the assumptions about the city's ongoing relationship with if we go in this direction, what's the relationship between the city and the joint office moving forward? And I'll let you guys kind of talk about that until I run out of time, or until the chair shuts us off.
Well, I'll be very quick. You actually captured it accurately, Commissioner Mapps. The joint office is a critical part of a larger system. And one thing that was important to me, and I think to us, and leadership of the joint office, is to acknowledge where we need to lean in and lead on things like permanent supportive housing, shelter development and operations, et cetera, rapid rehousing, those programs that you saw, and where we need to participate in a larger effort around behavioral health, substance abuse, recovery beds. It's very emblematic that the press conference yesterday was at Lolo Pass, and the funding there, city and even within the county, 3 different funding sources within the county for a single project. And to me, that's very indicative of the way that we need to collaborate. That can't just be the joint office. We're essential, but we're not the whole plan anymore. And I think that's a really critical mind shift that the city and the county have taken together.
Great, thanks. And Sky, what's the city's relationship with the joint office if we move in this direction?
Yeah, so that's part of our ongoing IGA negotiations that Chris kind of touched on, but we'll also be briefing you all on kind of where we are in terms of that draft in the next few weeks. But basically, we will still be sending that amount of money over for those specific shelter beds that we've funded in the past historically. But the joint office is a county department, and so our IGA negotiations have acknowledged that, and also acknowledged that we need this more holistic system. So part of the homelessness response system is including the city at every different level. So including PHB, the Housing Bureau, and including, for example, Portland Solutions, which is close to home for me, a lot of the programs that we've stood up, like the mayor mentioned. So the Public Environment Management Office, the SSCC, the Street Services Coordination Center, and some city shelter programs that will also be included in this work. And we'll be sitting at the table at the implementation committee to kind of work through some of those pieces that really are not housed in the joint office, and the joint office shouldn't be asked to take care of those pieces as well, but they should be at the table so we know kind of what's happening for that system and the continuum of care that it's a part of.
Great. I will wrap it up here. I look forward to learning more about how we actually get to here to there in terms of housing folks through different services. So I look forward to that table when it comes out. And I appreciate the evolution of the city's thinking about our role within the joint office. I think there has been a fiction, which I think the city is largely guilty of I think, misunderstanding what the joint office actually is. It's emerged into a county department here. I think we still kind of think of it as a pure joint effort. In practice, that hasn't been sort of my experience in the last 3.5 years or however long I've been around. So it'd be great if, as we move forward to more effective strategies, if we can just have some clarity about what the city's doing, what the county's doing, and what our relationship is. And Madam Chair, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Commissioner Mapps. Commissioner Beeson.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, Dan, sorry, Sky. I don't know if these will be questions you can answer. I wondered whether the rebase budget amount of $10.5 million was the cost of rebasing itself, or just the general cost of that work. You can answer that now. Okay.
Hi, for the record, Anna Plum. So that is the cost to rebase some of our contracts. It is not all of them, and we can send you some more detail about what that looks like. Okay. But it's focusing on, to an earlier point, it's focusing on those shelters that don't have the resources that they need to get up to those higher exits. Okay. So it's the cost of additional, for the most part, staffing.
Okay.
Yeah, but we can send you some more details on what it actually breaks down into.
Yes, please, Steve. Thank you. I've heard from plenty of providers about the need for that rebasing, so really appreciate that this is wrapped in. And then I hate to be an optimist, but I'm wondering if you can just tell me if I'm reading some of these maps right. So in the total number of beds that at least the joint office, or I think even in general, in total, we've tripled the number of shelter beds over the last 8 years. We've doubled them in just the last 4 years based on that table that I'm seeing. On page 9? Nope, I lied.
And are you looking at 13?
13.
Okay. Yeah, it's a 95%. It's not full doubling, but close. And a lot of that is the increasing in the partnerships with the city of Portland and those alternative sheltering sites that we're able to get up pretty quickly.
Okay. I mean, that growth is certainly faster than the city's population growth. So in some ways, the narrative we talk about shelter is not all the way informed by what we've actually done or achieved or accomplished, and just recognizing that all of those providers' work has meant a lot over those last 4 or 5 years. I also want to just recognize the geographic spread of the shelters and what a dramatic change that's been, in part, I think, to this county's insistence for geographic distribution. And also, I know the city made a specific amendment on its own task sites to ensure that there was geographic distribution. So returning back to what Commissioner Stegman and the City of Gresham has imparted, providing services and opportunities throughout, I really appreciate. I also recognize that for many years, plenty of people in the homelessness system have been ringing the alarm bells that public policy took a long time to catch up in public sentiment, to really shift shelters from the cloak of invisibility so we can pretend that people are not suffering in our community, to really a necessary step on an ongoing path to solution. So I appreciate that we are building more and more services into shelter provision to ensure that, again, it's not just to invisibilize the people we don't want to be reminded of that we failed. I had a question about quality improvement, and sort of, I recognize that in the new governance structure, we have like a meeting cadence that is just necessary from all the ways that it takes to bring bureaucrats together. But I'm also wondering, like, how are we using sort of individual moments that either providers are lifting up as sort of, or we have quality improvement teams to sort of deploy in looking at this data and saying, here's where we have gaps, or here's where we're sticking, as ways of improving the system continuously that don't necessarily require our governance structure to be able to do. Is this question making sense?
Yeah, I can speak to a little bit, and I don't know if anyone else would like to as well. And I will say, on a very micro level, not micro, but the Joint Office actually is engaging in some of those efforts right now. We have 2 evaluations that we're either already working on or about to start. One of them is a pathway evaluation, which is looking at how folks do move through shelter into housing to get a sense of what is the most effective way to get folks into housing. And we're also partnering with HRAC on looking at different models of shelter and how they work, and what the return on investment for those are. We are also adding a few quality improvement folks we are asking to add some quality improvement folks to our budget for the next year to help us do that work.
Okay. Yeah. I think the only thing there are 2 specific examples that providers have brought to me where I'm like, oh, how do we use those examples as figuring out how a system is broken? And so as a result, how are we creating the systems for those specific examples to move up the chain for dissection about what went wrong and use it to help inform the stuff? Because it's easy to do system planning from this philosophical place, but how are we using that real life provider examples as ways to unearth and surface that work? And I also just want to continually plug the Medicaid connections and how we're bringing folks into OHP, how we're getting people smart on that billing, so we can really draw down that federal resource for all the ways that we might be able to use it. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Gonzalez.
I just want to air my appreciation for the shift in tone and focus from our last joint meeting. There's clearly an emphasis on shelter in this plan. I think we were pretty clear from the city's perspective the importance of that, and just appreciative of the shifts there. Also want to recognize in your top line objectives that you call out specifically the foster care system and folks leaving the behavioral health and health system. These are particularly cruel aspects of the status quo. The number of folks that end up unsheltered on our streets, leaving foster care, leaving our medical care system, our behavioral health system. So I just want to call out, I'm deeply appreciative of you highlighting that there's area of focus on. I feel like oftentimes that those areas don't get enough attention, and from my vantage point, we have an elevated moral responsibility to those segments of the population. Then I want to transition to a harder question, and it's probably for you, Jim, Skylar, and Anna together, but we have expanded shelter in recent years, as you document well. And yet, visible homelessness is not decreasing in the city of Portland. And arguably 2020 to today, when adjusted for inflation, adjusted for increased earning capacity, real rents haven't increased in the city of Portland, at least not in the city core. So we're two realities are true. We're increasing shelter, real rents aren't going up in the city of Portland, and yet we are seeing visible homelessness at incredibly high rates. And we look at the 2024 count, Multnomah County shows a significant increase in homelessness. Both Clackamas County and Washington County showed decreases. So the question is, what can we learn from Washington County and Clackamas County that we're not doing in Multnomah County?
You guys all just might want to sit up at the.
Yeah. I don't know if yeah, it's done. Okay. Thanks, Skylar Bruckert out for the record. Thanks, Commissioner. So I think a lot of different aspects to that question. So I think it might sound trite, but obviously homelessness is, there's not one kind of cause. And so I think we have to look at all the different causes for what we're seeing kind of on the streets. And we've really tried to dig into exactly how people are flowing in. You mentioned two of those, foster care system, folks exiting from behavioral health or healthcare systems as well as the incarceration system. So I think that is something that we've found in the data, and we're analyzing that and trying to stem that tide with 1115 waiver, with Medicaid, different aspects. We're trying to be really creative about that. I think as far as other counties, I think there's long been kind of a thought that folks from other jurisdictions or out of state kind of will flow into Multnomah County. There is some indication from data about folks coming from other parts of our region into Multnomah County or the city of Portland for services. That's not everybody. It's not maybe to the level that folks talk about in the media, but it is happening. And so I think one thing we're excited about with SHS, the Supportive Housing Services Measure, is the investment happening in other parts of the region because there are services that are being established there. So I think we're looking at how that will kind of impact different numbers, and I think the data will show some interesting trends on that. I do know someone on my team who really focuses deep on data has seen kind of the decrease in other counties and increase in Multnomah County and said, what if some of those are the same folks? So we need to also analyze the by name list and figure out kind of how folks are entering into homelessness in our region, and also maybe why some aspects of what they're doing in Washington or Clackamas County that are working, and we can learn from that. And I think having the metro kind of region and that governance structure will help us have those dialogues and have those discussions about which aspects kind of our strategic plan we should implement that maybe we haven't implemented in the past. So trying to learn from each other and actually share that dialogue.
I just want to lean on one point there. You allude to some of the polling data on who comes to Multnomah County for services, and that's been a controversial topic for years in the region. I would just submit that that's too narrow a framing of that question, right? So folks who may come to Multnomah County for services is one component of the migratory. Our reputation, relative enforcement in adjoining jurisdictions can all be factors that drive migratory unsheltered populations. And I would submit that I don't think we can pay too little attention to this, or too much attention to this question, given that we are investing substantial amounts. We are investing in shelter. We're getting pushed through with some success of the people coming into our shelter system, and yet the overall number is not decreasing in our region. And as we think about what we do going forward, and again, this is at a time when real rent has actually not increased in our region, at least in the city core. So it just leads to some tough conversations about what do we need to supplement the good work here. I guess the last piece, and Jim, Chris, or Anna, did you have anything to add to Skylar's perspective on this?
No, she nailed it.
I guess the last general bucket, I asked last time, I continue to ask, the money that the city sends to the joint office, is it better for us to just invest those dollars directly and to coordinate with the county? And so I kind of leave that out as an open question. Two programs not really on the list of immediate funding right now are PSR and CHAT. Those are substantial dollars being spent by the city of Portland in very direct homeless outreach. They do have potential for other funding sources, but it feels like the joint office is a good fit. And as we're looking at a brutal budget year, to me, this is still an open question. I'll have other comments on governance offline. I think you guys have done good work here, but might have some suggestions, especially as we think through the new form of government. I would just throw one other piece when you're looking at some of the advisory committees, that last bucket. We don't talk enough about the impact on natural areas that unsheltered camping is having in our region. I think we need to elevate that. Anybody takes a ride on the Willamette River sees things that you just don't see from sidewalks, and it's brutal what's going on in our natural areas. Last but not least, just the impact on families and children, even in housed communities, of unsheltered populations near schools, on sidewalks, in parks. I think that's a part we need to elevate, and might do that on the advisory committee. I'm done. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Gonzalez. Commissioner Ryan.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Chair Vega-Peterson and Mayor Wheeler, for bringing us together for, this is the third time, and it's the best one so far. And I think what you're witnessing is some alignment, for the most part, that we haven't witnessed in some time. Now I have a request out to Metro and also to the state that we continue to get all 4 local governments aligned, and that's the key. For too long, we've been fighting with each other over the diagnosis of the problem and some shared goals, and they just haven't been there. And so it's difficult to get impact when you're siloed in your approaches. So today is different than what I've experienced in the past. There's a shared voice, there's a shared responsibility with goals, real-time data, get to that in a minute, and a shared commitment to accountability. And finally, if we do get some wins, let's all just know it's shared credit, because that often is tough for politicians. And so I hope that in the election year of 2024, we can continue to check egos at the door and stay focused on the problem at hand and be mission-driven in our purpose. There's 4 themes that I have here, and I don't know if the questions can be answered today, but I wanted to get them out into the public. I really appreciate, of course, the commitment to data. That means we have to build a data culture. And so in the data culture, we know that the ED, the middle managers, and most importantly, those who are serving homeless people on the ground and are getting to build relationships with them, have time in their days to input data. We too often don't have any inputs, so it's really difficult for us to do critical assessments. And then with those assessments, it needs to be part of the culture. So it's frequent, real time, make adjustments. Don't get stuck in a plan that's 3 years old if we keep seeing results in real time that aren't working. We got to keep failing forward. That's what you do when you're in a crisis and you're trying to improve. So do you think that we have the supports necessary for our providers to shift into a more data-driven culture environment?
You want to talk about that? Well, I think we've identified the need and we're working towards solutions. I don't want to stand here and say that we have all those in place. But for example, for our outreach workers, we're moving quickly to get new data tools into their hands so that we can track the work that they're doing with individual level clients.
I appreciate that. And I think that as long as we continue to make sure that we keep it top of mind, that matters. The fact that we met, you and I did, with the head of TriMet, I think a lot of people know TriMet, especially the yellow lines and the lines going into Gresham, are our largest daytime shelters that we have. And so we have to go to where the people are and bring them in as a partner as well. The other one that I wanted to get at is better practices around withdrawals. The sobering stations of the past, they were closed in 2019 because they weren't safe. Clearly a mistake, because it wasn't safe for any of us, but it certainly hasn't been safe for people that are just trying to go on a walk in their apartments where people are out on the streets. And so building these withdrawal centers is going to be really complex. It's going to be very messy and challenging. We have to go. It's urgent. And so I'm a little concerned about the timeline. Is there any commitment to trying some more innovative needs about getting these withdrawal centers open for, again, these really cheap poisonous drugs that are stumping behavioral health doctors on what we can do about it?
Yes, short answer. I will just say quickly, just because I have a really example from this morning. So obviously working with Commissioner Brim Edwards and the team that's working on the Sobering Center and 24/7 drop-off. But in the interim, we're actually in the middle of this 90-day fentanyl emergency. So our 8 a.m. check-in call this morning, Nate Takara, who's the incident commander for the Street Services Coordination Center, shared that there was someone that they encountered in the street with outreach teams. He was interested in detox, went to Clinton Triangle, and because he didn't meet the basic admittance criteria quite yet, he was a little sick for a detox center. So they actually let him wait at a pod at Clinton Triangle, the temporary alternative shelter site, and then took him to detox. He has since ended his detox stay there, but needed a place to stay because he is unsheltered and homeless, is currently back at the Clinton Triangle pod. So just as one example, I think we're trying to help build that continuum of care right now in real time, just in some 8 a.m. kind of triage calls, frankly. And so trying to build that infrastructure. We're also talking about some immediate kind of term withdrawal management and social detox. We're really kicking the can on a lot of different policy ideas and really trying to figure out what would work in the immediate term while we also simultaneously try to stand up that sobering center. So we know that that's kind of the dream that we've all been working towards. We're really excited about the legislative investment in that, but I think some of these short-term policy goals for these teams to work together, and frankly, the providers are really excited about it. So recently we just connected CODA, which has some outpatient opioid program treatment capacity right now in their lobby for day-to-day kind of medication for folks going through withdrawal, who don't need maybe that level of detox. They can actually go right now, and we're connecting with their ED and trying to get people over there immediately. So there are some short-term kind of fixes that we're working on, but obviously it's not that longer-term solution.
I appreciate that. You had real-time response. And I know when you said kick the can, it wasn't down the road. It was actually amongst...
Sorry, kick the tires maybe was what I was looking for, yeah. It's been a morning, yeah.
I'll just make a couple of comments. The workforce focus, I was missing that. I think one of the best ways to get people in our villages or starting to build some resilience is getting them back to work as soon as possible. It's a big way to help inspire that resilience that needs to be built, because that's the real goal, is for many of our people who are currently out on the streets having a miserable life with their addiction and mental health issues not being treated, they need that service. And so we're trying to provide that as soon as possible. I think the government's model is decent. I think that there should be more inclusion of those that aren't in the sector of the homeless providers or the government, but actually those that are key proponents of the investments. We had a lot of people step up to pass Here Together in May of 2020, and they need to be seen and a part of the engagement, not just, I think, at that top level, but infused a little bit more. That's a comment that I wanted to get out. Before I go any further, I just want to make sure that hearing that we have really nowhere to go but up, the eye test from the public isn't great on this issue. We know that. But I think it must be hard for people that are working many, many hours a week working with those that are homeless. So the providers out there, thank you so much. We see you. We want to support you. We want you to be a part of the building. That's why it's so important to have data from the ground up. And just know that we're definitely in this together, but we'll never go anywhere unless we improve the practices that come from all of you that are closest to the ground. So I just look forward to continuing to experience this alignment. You want me to stop? Mm-hmm. All right. Anyway, you can really feel it when you're sitting next to the chair. All right. Great to be here. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Ryan. Commissioner Brim Edwards.
It's nice to have a buffer. I want to thank everybody for all the work that went into today's presentation and the launch of this. And I want to just start by saying 11,153 is a number we just need to keep top of mind, which is the new baseline number of homeless in Multnomah County. And before we start segmenting off everybody into different groups that know that's twice the number that we have been previously talking about. And it's just really important to keep that as our focal point, again, before we start sort of disaggregating it and dividing it up. I'm supportive of the direction we're moving in with the Homeless Response Action Plan, and also know it can be improved, and that I hope our structures are nimble enough that as we get data, as we explore strategies that are either new or ones that we've revamped or trying to improve, that we continue to evaluate them and pressure test them to see if they're actually creating the desired results on the ground. Commissioner Myron has some really good questions about the data and the plan, and I think the answers to those questions for all of us will help inform the work plans, the implementation, and the reporting. So I'm looking forward to getting the answers to those. I also want to just call out, I'm appreciative, it was just one line, but that the homeless response action plan includes a 24/7 drop-off sobering center, and I really appreciate the city commissioners and the city staff, as well as the county commissioners and county staff who've helped work on that. It's a key piece of one of the continuum of care. I continue to be supportive of this body meeting jointly. So this is the only world I've known as a county commissioner that we meet on a regular basis. So I'm just assuming that we're just going to continue to do this and our work gets better. Commissioner Beeson, this is just like, I guess, the regular way we work for you and I, the new ones. I do have a couple just questions generally and maybe just comments about the work going ahead. In terms of accountability, and again, starting with that 11,153, just making sure at the very beginning we marry our desired outcomes and goals with reporting on where we are, even if we're not making progress, because that's an important data point, and that be regularly reported to this body as we meet, again, so that if strategies aren't moving the dial, let's, as Commissioner Ryan said, fail forward fast and move on, be nimble and adjust. I also think it's important for the public to see that we are tracking our progress and our work, or when things don't work. So that's a request. This is a question, I think, for Director Fields. What will it take for the Joint Office to regularly evaluate the providers it contracts to deliver services and share the evaluation publicly?
All of our contracts include accountability measures, and so that work is being tracked on a regular basis in those contracts and in the relationship that we hold ongoing with the providers. We haven't reported that collectively or publicly, so we're certainly open to that, but I don't want anybody to think that we don't currently have accountability measures and are not actually tracking the performance of some of our providers. We don't frequently talk about that in public, but I could name names today, but we don't do that because what we're trying to do is create a stronger infrastructure, including providers who have performance issues, financial issues, leadership issues. All across the board, we see those every week, and we're working with providers behind the scenes. And it doesn't serve anybody to surface where we think providers are struggling, even though we do track that and we do support those organizations in our work with them day to day.
So as we rebase the contracts, which should provide more support for providers and contractors, will the accountability measures be aligned with the goals in this plan, like making sure that individuals receive wraparound services, exit to housing, all those types of things? Or what are the accountability measures, and do they actually marry and incentivize providers to align with what we're saying are our goals for the larger system?
Yeah, I appreciate you emphasizing that, and I take that as a leadership viewpoint that we need to be really clear and consistent about that. If you look at, for example, the metric around shelter throughput, we know what the current metric is because we measure that, and we also know it's lower than we'd like. So the investments we make will be tied to increasing those measures, and we'll continue to report those back to our board.
And Commissioner Berman, you've got about 30 more seconds.
Okay, I guess I'm just going to say, I think there's value in decision makers and those who are voting on budgets having access to the accountability measures and where we're having success and not, because without that, we're maybe funding people who aren't getting the outcomes we want, and I think it's important for us to have that. So, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Rubio.
Thank you. I have a few questions, but want to just start by expressing my gratitude that we're talking through all of this today because we need to do it all. I also want to share my gratitude to the excellent and capable county staff and city staff, and also my colleagues and everyone who contributed to this, this work. Over the past few months, I was part of the conversations designing the shelter strategy with my colleagues, and it was clear to me that the team was trying to use the best data that it had to set clear, measurable goals for the next 2 years. And while we'll always wish we had better data, this strategy starts with what we have, and we're being transparent about what we're trying to achieve. I personally love seeing the map of the expansion of shelters between 2015 and 2024. I think that's very powerful. I also really appreciate and acknowledge the acknowledgement of the distinct need for DV survivors and families and culturally specific options. I've already shared my enthusiasm for the PSH investments, and we've heard from some providers about how those resources to increase on-site staffing and other services, which will better meet the needs of those residents and bring more stability to the building and its other residents as well. And regarding the homelessness response system, I cannot tell you how good it feels to see an aligned, comprehensive approach to this work that incorporates a new government structure with accountability. And while I agree that some of these models or approaches aren't necessarily new, I feel what's different and what is new is that there's committed leadership and there are new stakeholders and providers at the table. And the painstaking work of intentionally braiding of resources behind this. And the very fact of that, to me, is refreshing and needed. Over the past year, I've seen us at the city and county increasingly start to swim in the same direction, much more so in years past, as some of my colleagues have mentioned. And I think that's reflected in the design of this system plan, as well as the vision for how it'll be implemented. I also want to acknowledge how critical it is that we not only expand the shelter inventory, but also start to lean more into the behavioral health space, as others have mentioned. And as the housing commissioner, it's not the main connection to the work that I do, but it's very much a part of the landscape. Moving forward, I'm very interested to see how the implementation committee and the advisory committees work as well together, because even these kinds of critical feedback can be very meaningful. But we still do need the capacity on the staffing end, and that's something I want to really explicitly lift up, and getting that feedback quickly back into the continuous improvement circle. So I want to just lift that up as well. I also know the county is currently working on taking over the HMIS system, which will allow both county staff and city staff to have direct access to clear data. It's a critical piece of our commitment to transparency and accountability in our work together. I also want to emphasize how critical it is for us to keep building affordable housing, including permanent supportive housing, so that there is somewhere for folks to go as they move up the continuum. And because we know that a lot of people are not ready and may never be ready to live on their own without these kinds of support. And over the last several years, PHB has been investing about $20 million a year to build new PSH units. But those bonding funding sources are being used up. So the critical question that we need to be asking ourselves is, what is our next source of funding for affordable housing, and when will that come? So I don't believe that there was the slide included in the deck for the homeless response plan, but I want to acknowledge that it's in the full document. It's a really critical piece of this very multifaceted plan. So in closing, I just have a couple questions, and in the interest of time, I'm happy to get the answers later. But a lot of the items we discussed today will require allocating additional SHS funding. So do we have long-term budget projections to help us understand how much of these revenues will be needed to go towards these things? And of course, I'm particularly interested in PSH. And then my last question is, we're all here, we're all at the table, we're leaning in, and we've got 8 months until there's new city and county leadership. across the board. What do you all need from us in order to make sure that this strategy and system is successful? And how can we best use these 8 months to stand up the structure, demonstrate some early successes, and stabilize the structure so that it's sturdy for our new city council and other elected officials and our new form of government? So thank you.
I can take the last couple just really quickly in the interest of time. So I think we are actively budgeting kind of into this plan and for the new form of government. So keeping all of those pieces in mind because we want to really stand it up. I will just also say that my boss, Sarah Morrissey, who's here, and I yesterday started a 30, 60, 90 plan for these specific goals and the work that will need to be done in the next 30, 60, and 90 days. So we are really invested in early wins and really getting some of this work done immediately. But do you want to speak to the budget?
2 quick questions. We are actively developing and expect to have, I'm going to go out on a limb here, Antoinette, and say here in the next week, we'll have that 5-year projection for SHS dollars, and that will absolutely form our point of view on the affordable housing debate occurring at Metro right now. So obviously that'll be broadly shared. And I want to note that 2 city commissioners have referenced workforce, and I so appreciate that, and it's critical. At the county and with the SHS dollars, that's been a huge focus. Just this month, United Way pushed out $10 million across 64 providers, very low barrier dollars designed to support organizational health, wage increases, maybe extra days off, professional development and training, other supports designed to keep and retain employees in our workforce. And we're asking them just to report on 2 metrics at the end of the year. Were those dollars effective in increasing your employee retention rate and decreasing your FTE vacancy rate? And we will know in the coming months whether those dollars were effective in achieving that workforce goal.
Thank you. Commissioner Stegman.
Thank you, Chair. I can't help reflect how remarkable this conversation has been. And thank you, Chris, when you did the briefing with me and we had a conversation about where we are consciously focusing on youth exiting our foster care system, people leaving our hospitals and our ERs, people leaving our behavioral health institutions, and people leaving our jails and prisons. And the comment I made to Chris was like, wow, if we could impact those populations, I think that we could solve the majority of our homelessness. So I just, want us to bathe in that moment that we are laying down our stake and saying these are the populations and this is what we need to do going forward together. I do have a couple questions, and you don't have to answer them now. I would love to learn a little bit more about how the City of Portland is streamlining the permitting system, because we're providing the services, and obviously the city has a big role around getting more units to market. So I'd like to learn a little bit more about there. I'd also like to know how we are engaging with homeless service providers that aren't part of our system. For example, my father's house in Gresham, I think we've excluded, if you're not part of our contractors, there are service providers out there that need to be enfolded in the work that we're doing as well. And then I'd also like to learn a little bit more about the commercial buildings that we have. I've read kind of contradictory articles about it's really not going to have a great impact, it's going to be very expensive. So we'd just like to learn a little bit more about that. So in 2015, before the state of emergency and the creation of the Joint Office of Homeless Services, I served on the Gresham City Council and remember being involved in siloed conversations about approaches to homelessness, livability, and specific strategies for unique populations, like the many communities with intersecting diversities that we are discussing today. At the time, the City of Gresham and Multnomah County were convening conversations about affordable housing and the necessary layering of services within our communities. If you recall the plan for 2015, there were very few options for shelter beyond the central core of Portland. Those that did exist in East County were faith-based, high barrier, or the family shelter model, which we soon abandoned for a better practice. Since then, our East County cities have been involved in conversation with my office as trends in housing instability and the acuity of need changed in East County. When we look at the shelter system now, it is much more geographically equitable, but there are more service and workforce gaps as we attempt to deepen our investments. And unfortunately, filling those gaps seems at times to work against other areas within our system. But we are on the right path. I want to thank the chair's office for making space within the regional conversation to deepen our understanding and our investments needed in East County. I'm excited that in partnership with the East County cities, we have procured a home for a future service and navigation hub at Cook Plaza. We've been able to build out the Multnomah County Sheriff's Hope Team, which has come a very long way since my first amendment to include their outreach in our county budget. We've seen much needed affordable housing growth, East County specific shelter and service providers grow exponentially. And now we have a solid footprint of shelters, inclement and year-round, as well as dedicated outreach and abatement teams for areas east of the city of Portland. I appreciate Jessica Harper and her team with the City of Gresham as they build out a more responsive and trauma-informed outreach approach. And thank you to Dan and his team at the Joint Office of Homeless Services for their continued partnership. And I'm especially excited to welcome Jeff Woodward as our new liaison, who is working specifically in East County. Are we where we need to be? Not yet. But this is a solid framework and foundation and the correct step in the right direction. With only the better part of 1 year left on the board, I feel that progress has been made, and now we have favorable weather conditions for the plane while flying it that will enable us to pick up speed and altitude. The voters have trusted us with the resources to make this happen, and that's why the unification of our two jurisdictions is so important. Portland City Council will look very different by our next convening, as will our county board. And I, for one, am incredibly proud of where we are today. I'm hopeful that the strong progress that we've made thus far stands as a foundational baseline in our collective partnership with each other and our community. Thank you all for your work.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Stegman. Mayor, do you have final comments?
I have only the briefest. I'll circle back to the team. I do have a question about the vision for budget alignment, not just for shelter, but for the overall system. I know where you all live. I'll catch up with you later. I just want to thank all of you. I thought this was a terrific conversation. I want to thank all the folks working so hard on this. To the future, let's keep moving forward.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor. I want to thank everyone for the really good discussion, the really good conversation, the good questions that I know we'll follow up on if we weren't able to answer them. I want to thank the staff for the incredible work on this, for this really in-depth presentations. Amy, Brandy, Jessica, thank you so much for being here, for all your work in putting together the shelter strategy. I have to say, I'm really excited right now. I'm already really excited about the potential. I'm excited about the community engagement period that we are now entering into for the Homelessness Response Action Plan. I think that's going to be a really important thing, and we've got a real opportunity here as we bring forward in April the final plan, so I'm looking forward to that. There will be two opportunities for virtual town halls during this period. There is going to be one for the general public on March 21st and one for service providers on March 18th, and I look forward to hearing the feedback from that. There's also opportunities to view the plan online and give feedback at maltco.us/HRAP. And you can also email county staff at hrapfeedback@maltco.us. We are going to continue moving forward with the work on the intergovernmental agreement, as we heard today. Just really appreciate that. And I have to say, I think some of the questions and some of the issues that were raised by the folks up here really reflect the importance of having a homelessness response action plan and system that is broader than just what the joint office has been. Commissioner Ryan, your questions around behavioral health and what does that look like with the withdrawal pieces, right? That's critical to have our behavioral health and our healthcare partners at the table for that. The workforce and employment opportunities that you talked about as well. Commissioner Rubio, you talked about housing and really the importance of that. And those are all critical pieces to the success of this plan long term and our ability to reach the goals that we've committed to in public. So just appreciate this work, excited about our opportunities going forward. Appreciate everyone's time. That concludes today's briefing. The Multnomah County Board of Commissioners will reconvene at 9:30 on Thursday. There being no further business, we are adjourned.